The Mojave Sun didn't care about rank or reputation. It hammered down on Fort Irwin's Range 47 like a forge, turning sand into white powder and steel targets into heat shimmer ghosts. At 1400 hours on a Tuesday in late August 2024, the temperature gauge read 112 degrees Fahrenheit, and the only movement came from dust devils spinning themselves dizzy across the valley floor. 6 Marines stood in the shade of a canvas observation structure, their rifles racked against sandbags, their eyes scanning a landscape that looked more like Mars than California. These weren't ordinary shooters. Each had earned their place through blood, sweat, and 1,000 rounds downrange. Scout snipers from different units, handpicked for the Advanced Long-Range Marksmanship Assessment, a joint training exercise where records weren't just broken, they were baptized in bragging rights. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Kane stood slightly apart from the others, his weathered face unreadable behind Oakley sunglasses. At 38, Kane carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much to be impressed by loud voices and bigger claims. His uniform bore the subdued pins of a distinguished marksman. But what set him apart wasn't the medals. It was the way he watched, cataloging details others missed, his mind always 3 steps ahead of the present moment. The other 5 snipers were younger, sharper around the edges, their confidence bordering on swagger. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves led the pack, a 29-year-old with movie star looks and a competition record that read like fiction. 2 years running champion at the Western States Precision Rifle Challenge. 17 confirmed kills during his deployment to Helmand Province. A natural talent who knew it and made sure everyone else knew it too. The range stretched out before them in measured increments. Targets at 800 meters, 1,200, 1,800, 2,400, and at the far edge, where the heat made everything dance and shimmer, a steel silhouette at 3,200 meters. 2 full miles. That target had stood untouched through 3 days of competition. Every man present had tried. Every man had failed. The laws of physics and wind and human limitation had drawn a line in the sand, and so far, that line held. Kane checked his watch. The schedule said their session would end at 1,600 hours, with a final rotation of attempts at the long target before pack-out. He made notes on a small field pad, documenting wind speeds, temperature variations, the way mirage affected visibility at different times of day. Old habits from his instructor days at Quantico, back when the world made more sense. That was when she arrived. No fanfare, no radio call ahead. Just a dust-covered pickup truck, rolling to a stop 50 yards from their position. Parking in the full sunlight heat was a suggestion rather than a fact. The engine cut. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's side door opened and a woman stepped out. She wore faded jeans, civilian hiking boots gone gray with use, and a plain tan shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had given up trying to be neat. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that said she cared about anyone's opinion. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of muscle memory older than thought, reaching into the truck bed to pull out a battered rifle case and a small canvas backpack. The snipers noticed her immediately. Of course they did. 6 men in the middle of nowhere, and a woman shows up alone. The joke started before she was halfway to the observation tent. Did someone order entertainment? Corporal James Ortiz grinned, elbowing the man next to him. Maybe she's lost, looking for the craft fair or something, Sergeant First Class Tony Mitchell added, drawing laughs. Dylan Reeves squinted at her, his competitive instincts kicking in before his manners. Civilian, probably some contractor's wife wanting to see what we do out here. Someone should tell her this isn't a petting zoo. Kane said nothing, but his eyes tracked her approach with growing curiosity. Something about the way she moved, deliberate, unhurried, like she knew exactly where she was going and why. She reached the edge of the tent's shade and stopped, setting her case down gently, almost reverently. Her eyes swept across the range, taking in distances and angles, and for just a moment, her gaze landed on Kane, direct, unblinking. Then she looked away and pulled out a small notepad from her back pocket. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the range safety officer, approached her with clipboard in hand. Ma'am, this is a restricted training area. I'm going to need to see your authorization. She didn't look up from her notepad where she was writing numbers in precise columns. I'm on the observer list. guest of Colonel Hendricks. Rodriguez frowned, scanning his roster. I don't have any civilians listed for today. Check your email from this morning. Amendment to the schedule. Kane watched this exchange with growing interest. Her voice was low, controlled, without the apologetic tone most civilians used around military personnel. Rodriguez pulled out his phone, scrolled through messages, and his frown deepened. I've got an email here, but there's no name attached. Just says, approved observer, credentials verified by J2. You have ID. She reached into her pocket and handed him a card. Kane couldn't see what it said, but Rodriguez's posture changed subtly. His jaw tightened. He handed the card back and nodded once. You'll need to stay in the observation area. No handling of government weapons. If you need anything, let me know. She pocketed the card and went back to her notepad. Rodriguez walked back to his post, but Kane noticed the way he pulled out his phone again and made a call, speaking in low, urgent tones with his back turned. Dylan Reeves hadn't missed any of this. He swaggered over to where the woman stood, his grin confident and condescending in equal measure. So what brings you out to our little playground? Writing an article, doing research for a book? She finished her notation before looking up at him. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black in the shade, and completely empty of the reaction he expected. No flirtation, no intimidation, just a level gaze that lasted exactly 1 second longer than comfortable. Observing, she said. Observing what exactly? You a ballistics expert or something? Or something. Reeves laughed, loud enough for the others to hear. You picked a good day for it. You're about to see some world-class shooting. That target out there at 3,200? We're all taking another crack at it. Money says I'm the one who finally rings steel. She glanced at the distant target, then back at her notes. Good luck. The dismissal was so complete, so effortless, that Reeves actually took a step back. His smile flickered. Behind him, Ortiz made a low whistling sound and muttered something about getting shut down. Reeves shot him a glare and returned to the firing line, his ego bruised but his mouth not ready to quit. Hey, Kane, he called out. Maybe you should give our observer here the safety briefing. Make sure she knows which end the bullet comes out of. Kane didn't respond to the jab. He was too busy watching the woman, who had moved to the corner of the tent, where she had a clearer view of both the firing positions and the range beyond. She had pulled out what looked like a weathered Kestrel weather meter, taking readings, comparing them to her notes. Professional, methodical, the movements of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The afternoon rotation began. Mitchell went first, his custom Remington MSR set up on a bipod with all the accessories money and the Marine Corps could provide. Advanced optics, suppressor, hand-loaded match-grade ammunition. He took his time, working through his calculations with his spotter calling corrections. Wind 3.2 from 7 o'clock. Temperature 110. Mirage moderate to heavy. Mitchell adjusted, breathed, and fired. The shot echoed across the valley, swallowed by distance. 4 seconds later, they heard the faint sound of impact. Dirt kicked up 3 feet left of the target. No joy, the spotter confirmed. Ortiz went next. Then Lance Corporal Kevin Price. Then Reeves, who took his time, his jaw set with determination. His rifle was a work of art, a custom-built, Accuracy International, AXMC, in .338, Lapua Magnum, easily $15,000 worth of precision engineering. He made his calculations, checked them twice, and sent his round downrange with perfect form. The weight felt eternal. Then came the impact sound. Close. Maybe 6 inches right. But close wasn't good enough. The target remained silent, untouched, mocking. Reeves stood up from his position, his face tight with frustration. Wind shifted right as I broke the trigger. Sure it did, Ortiz muttered, earning a glare. Through all of this, the woman watched. But Kane realized she wasn't watching the targets. She was watching them. The way Mitchell gripped his rifle too tight. The way Ortiz rushed his breathing. The way Reeves compensated for a mirage pattern that didn't exist. She saw everything, cataloged it all in that battered notepad, and never said a word. Kane was the last scheduled shooter. He set up his rifle, a well-maintained M40A6, and worked through his range card with practice efficiency. His spotter, Sergeant Hayes, was solid and reliable, calling out data in calm, measured tones. Kane took his shot knowing it probably wouldn't connect. The conditions were wrong, the distance extreme, the variables too chaotic. But he sent it anyway because that was the job. The round impacted low and left, maybe 2 feet off target. Respectable, Hayes said. Best grouping of the day at that distance. Kane nodded and began breaking down his setup. The session was essentially over. They had given the long target their best efforts, and the long target had won. There was no shame in it. Physics was physics. That was when the woman moved. She walked to her rifle case and knelt beside it, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Every eye in the tent turned toward her. She unlatched the case and lifted the lid, and Dylan Reeves actually laughed out loud. "You have got to be kidding me." Inside the case was a Winchester Model 70, the kind of rifle you'd find in a pawn shop or a grandfather's closet. Woodstock worn smooth from decades of use, the finish faded and scarred. The scope was old glass, fixed power, nothing digital or fancy. The rifle looked like it had been to war and back, every scratch and dent a story no one would ever hear. "That's a hunting rifle," Mitchell said, not bothering to hide his amusement. "What are you going to do? Shoot a deer?" She lifted the rifle from the case with the kind of care reserved for relics and children. Her hands knew every contour, every imperfection. She carried it to an empty firing position at the end of the line, set it down on the sandbags, and began making adjustments to the scope with a small tool from her pocket. Reeves walked over, unable to resist. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that rifle is older than I am. If you're thinking about trying for that long target, you're wasting your time and our daylight." She didn't look at him, just continued her adjustments. "How many rounds have you put through your rifle?" "This one? Maybe 500 since I had it built. I've put 30,000 through mine. It knows my heartbeat." The confidence in her voice wasn't bravado. It was fact, stated plainly, like saying the sky was blue. Reeves opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Something in her tone made mockery feel suddenly inappropriate. "You really think you can hit that target?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I know I can." She opened her canvas pack and removed a single round. Not from a factory box, but from a small padded container, the brass casing polished to a dull gold sheen. Hand-loaded, custom-made. She held it up to the light for a moment, inspecting it with an expert's eye, then chambered it with a smooth, practiced motion. The bolt closed with a sound like a bank vault locking. The entire tent had gone quiet. Even Rodriguez had stopped whatever he was doing to watch. The woman settled behind the rifle, her body relaxed but precisely positioned. She didn't ask for a spotter, didn't request wind calls, didn't use any of the technology the Marines relied on. Instead, she closed her eyes. For 10 full seconds, she just breathed. Slow, measured breaths that seemed to align her entire being with some rhythm beyond the physical world. Then her eyes opened, and she studied the range with an intensity that made Kane's skin prickle. She was reading the desert, not with instruments, but with senses honed by time and experience. The way dust moved in spirals. The shimmer patterns that revealed temperature gradients. The slight haze that indicated humidity levels invisible to electronic sensors. She was doing in moments what their computers and meters took minutes to calculate, and she was doing it better. Her cheeks settled against the stock. Her finger found the trigger, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The shot cracked across the valley, a sound both violent and pure. The recoil pushed her shoulder back, but her body absorbed it like water absorbing a stone. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, just stayed in position, watching through her scope. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. Then, at the edge of perception, the distant steel target jerked hard to the left. The metallic clang of impact arrived a heartbeat later, rolling across the desert like distant thunder. Dead center. Perfect impact. 3,200 meters. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 6 trained snipers stood frozen, their minds trying to process what their eyes had just witnessed. It wasn't possible. The math didn't work. The equipment was wrong. The shooter was a civilian with a rifle older than most of their parents. And yet the target had moved. Kane was the first to find his voice. "Range safety, can you confirm impact?" Rodriguez had his spotting scope trained on the far target. His voice came out rough, like he'd swallowed sand. "Confirmed, dead center, clean hit." The woman stood up from her position, began breaking down her rifle with the same calm efficiency she'd shown setting it up. She didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't even look at the stunned Marines watching her, just packed her equipment with the care of someone completing a routine task, closed her case, and picked up her backpack. Dylan Reeves finally managed to speak. "Wait, who are you?" She paused at the edge of the tent, the sun painting her silhouette in harsh light in deep shadow. For a moment, Kane thought she might answer. Her eyes swept across them one more time, and in that gaze was something ancient and sad, the look of someone who had left normal human concerns behind long ago. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. Then she walked back to her truck, set her case in the bed, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine started. Dust kicked up as she turned around and headed back down the access road, disappearing into the heat shimmer like a mirage that had never been real to begin with. The Marines stood in silence for a long moment, then chaos erupted, everyone talking at once, demanding explanations, questioning what they'd seen. But Kane wasn't listening to them. He was walking to the firing position where she'd made her shot, his eyes scanning the ground. There, partially buried in the sand, kicked aside when she'd packed up. A single spent casing. He bent down and picked it up, the brass still warm in his palm. And that's when he saw it. Etched into the base of the casing, almost invisible unless you knew to look, was a mark. A small triangle inside a circle that wasn't quite complete. The circle had a gap at the top, like a mouth opened in an endless scream. Kane's blood went cold. He knew that mark. He'd seen it exactly once before, 18 years ago, in a place that wasn't supposed to exist, on equipment that wasn't supposed to be real. A memory surged up from the depths, sharp and unwelcome. Quantico, 2006. The elite classroom where he'd studied ballistics under a civilian contractor who taught like a man who'd forgotten more about shooting than most people would ever know. Dr. James Cross, brilliant, haunted, always watching the door like he expected someone to walk through it and end his world. Kane had seen that symbol on a custom rifle case in Dr. Cross's office. He'd asked about it once. "It's a reminder," the doctor had said, his voice distant, "that perfection always has a price, and sometimes the price is a piece of your soul." A week later, Dr. James Cross died in a single car accident on a rain-slick road in Virginia. The official report said he'd lost control, but Kane had seen the crash photos during the investigation. The tire marks told a different story. Someone had forced him off the road. No one had ever explained why a civilian ballistics instructor would be murdered. No one had even acknowledged it was murder. The case was closed in 48 hours, and Cross's name was scrubbed from the instructor roster like he'd never existed. Kane stood there in the blazing sun, holding that spent casing, and felt the past reaching out to grab him by the throat. Whoever that woman was, she wasn't just a skilled shooter. She was connected to something that had gotten a good man killed. And she just walked back into a world that had tried very hard to forget she existed. "Kane," Reeves called out, "what did you find?" Kane closed his fist around the casing and turned to face the younger Marine. Behind his sunglasses, his eyes were calculating, measuring how much truth to share. "Not here, not now, not with this many witnesses." "Nothing," he lied, "just brass." But Dylan Reeves wasn't stupid. He'd seen the way Kane's posture changed, the sudden tension in his shoulders. He walked over, his curiosity overriding his bruised ego. "That wasn't nothing. That was the best shooting any of us have ever seen, with a rifle that belongs in a museum. I want to know who she was." "Then ask Rodriguez." He checked her credentials. They both looked toward the range safety officer, who was on his phone again, his voice too low to hear. When he finished the call, his face was pale despite the sunburn. "Rodriguez," Reeves called out. "Who was she? What did her ID say?" Rodriguez hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She had clearance. That's all I can tell you." "Clearance for what? What agency?" "That's all I can tell you, Sergeant." The emphasis on rank was clear. This conversation was over, but the damage was done. Questions had been planted, and questions had a way of growing in the dark. The Marines began packing their gear, the usual chatter replaced by uncomfortable silence. Kane moved through the motions automatically, his mind elsewhere. He pulled out his phone and photographed the spent casing from multiple angles before slipping it into his pocket. Evidence. Of what, he wasn't sure yet. But his instructor's instincts were screaming that this mattered. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains by the time they loaded into their transport vehicles. Kane rode in silence, watching the desert scroll past, thinking about symbols and secrets, and a woman who shot like gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. Back at the base, he went through the evening routine on autopilot. Weapon check-in, debriefing, dinner in the mess hall where the story of the mystery shooter spread like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling. By the time Kane returned to his quarters, she'd become everything from a CIA assassin to a ghost to an alien in human skin. He closed his door, locked it, and sat down at his small desk. From his wall locker, he retrieved a footlocker he hadn't opened in years. Inside were mementos from his early career, certificates, photos, and buried at the bottom, a sealed envelope with his name written in Dr. Cross's distinctive handwriting. The envelope had arrived 3 months after the doctor's death, forwarded through a chain of private mail services. No return address, no explanation, just the envelope and whatever was inside. Kane had never opened it. Some part of him knew that once he broke that seal, there would be no going back. The contents would demand action, and action would demand consequences. But tonight, with that spent casing burning a hole in his pocket and a woman's dark eyes haunting his memory, Kane realized the time for avoiding consequences had passed. He broke the seal. Inside was a USB drive and a single sheet of paper with 4 words written in Cross's hand. When she finds you. Kane stared at those words for a long time. Not if, when. Like the doctor had known, even in 2006, that someday his past would catch up to the people he'd left behind. He inserted the USB drive into his laptop and opened the single file stored there. An audio recording. Dr. James Cross's voice, older and more tired than Kane remembered, speaking in the quiet, measured tones of a man making his confession. Marcus, if you're hearing this, then I'm dead. And if I'm dead, it means they found out I was going to talk. I'm sorry to burden you with this, but you're the only person I trust to do what's right. My daughter is alive. Her name is Maya. Maya Cross. She was 14 years old when I last saw her. She's the best shooter I ever trained. She's also the evidence that could bring down some very powerful people. The recording paused. Kane could hear Cross breathing, could almost see him gathering courage for what came next. I did something terrible, Marcus. Something I thought was patriotic, necessary, important. The CIA approached me in 2003. They had a proposal, a program. They wanted to train snipers from childhood, before their minds formed bad habits, before fear and morality and doubt could interfere with pure skill. They promised it was just theory, research, academic exercise. Another pause, longer this time. It wasn't theory. They recruited children, orphans, runaways, kids nobody would miss, 10 of them. My daughter was one of them. They told me she'd be safe, that I could oversee her training, protect her. I believed them. God help me, I believed them. Kane's hands had gone numb. He knew where this was going, and part of him wanted to stop the recording, but he couldn't. He had to hear it all. The program was called Longshot, Project Longshot. For 5 years, we trained those children to be perfect, and they became perfect. Too perfect. In 2006, I discovered the CIA planned to deploy them, put children in combat zones, turn them into weapons. I confronted the program director, Senator Richard Voss. He was CIA then, before he moved into politics. He told me the program was too valuable to shut down, that I'd sign non-disclosure agreements that would put me in prison for life if I talked. The recording crackled. When Cross spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I was going to talk anyway. I contacted a journalist, set up a meeting, but they must have known. They always know. The accident wasn't an accident, Marcus, and if they killed me, they'll kill the children too. Clean slate, no witnesses. Maya is smart. She'll run, she'll hide. But someday she might need help. Someday she might need someone who remembers that she's human, not just a weapon. The recording ended with a soft click. Silence filled Kane's quarters, broken only by his own heartbeat hammering in his ears. Project Longshot, children trained as snipers. Dr. Cross murdered to keep secrets. And Maya Cross, the woman who'd appeared today like a ghost made flesh, was the living proof of something that should never have existed. Kane sat in the darkness and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He could ignore this, delete the file, throw away the casing, pretend today never happened, walk away clean. But he wouldn't, couldn't, because somewhere out there, a woman who'd been turned into a weapon when she was barely old enough for high school was running from people who wanted her dead. And Kane was possibly the only person alive who knew why. He picked up his phone and hesitated. Who could he call? This was beyond normal channels, beyond the chain of command. This was Black Operations conspiracy theory nightmare fuel, and the moment he started making calls, he'd paint a target on his own back. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, 3 words. Delete the file. Kane's blood went cold. He looked around his quarters, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. They were watching. They knew he had the recording. They knew he knew. Another text came through immediately. Forget you saw her. Forget the shot. Forget everything. This is your only warning. Kane stared at the messages. Then deliberately, he backed up the audio file to 3 separate encrypted cloud services. He photographed every page of his range notes from today. He took more photos of the spent casing, including macro shots of the symbol. Then he typed a response to the unknown number. I don't take orders from cowards who hide behind burner phones. He hit send and waited. No response came, but Kane knew the die was cast. He just declared himself a player in a game he barely understood. And somewhere in the night, people were making decisions about what to do with him. He thought about Maya Cross, about the way she'd moved with absolute confidence, about the sadness in her eyes when she'd asked, "Does it matter?" About a woman who'd learned to shoot before she'd learned to be human. And he thought about Dr. James Cross, a good man who'd made a terrible mistake and paid for it with his life. Kane pulled out a notebook and began writing everything he could remember about Project Longshot from the recording. Names, dates, details. If they were going to come for him, he'd make sure the truth didn't die with him. Outside his window, the desert night was clear and cold. Stars burned overhead with ancient light, indifferent to human struggles and secrets. Somewhere under those same stars, Maya Cross was driving toward a horizon only she could see, carrying the weight of a past that refused to stay buried. And in Washington, D.C., in an office far removed from sand and heat and truth, a phone call was being made. Orders were being given. Assets were being activated. The ghost had reappeared, and ghosts by their very nature needed to be laid to rest. But what the men in those offices didn't understand, what they couldn't comprehend, was that some ghosts don't rest. Some ghosts shoot back, and some ghosts are real enough to bleed. Kane worked through the night, documenting everything, preparing for whatever came next. And as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, he made a decision. He was going to find Maya Cross. He was going to learn the full truth about Project Longshot, and he was going to make sure that Dr. James Cross's death meant something, whatever the cost, whatever the consequences. Some debts can only be paid in truth, and Marcus Kane had just inherited a debt 18 years overdue. The ghost line had been crossed. There was no going back now. Marcus Kane didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk watching the darkness outside his window thin into the gray promise of dawn, his mind turning over facts and implications like a soldier checking ammunition before a firefight. The USB drive sat in front of him, small and unremarkable, containing enough explosive truth to end careers and lives. By 0600 hours, he'd made 3 encrypted backups and hidden them in places even a thorough search wouldn't find. One in a false bottom of his field locker. Another uploaded to a secure server run by a former Marine intelligence officer who owed him a favor and knew better than to ask questions. The third he mailed to himself at a P.O. box he maintained under a different name in Nevada, a precaution from his deployment days that was about to prove its worth. The warning text from the unknown number hadn't been followed by action. No one kicked down his door. No official summons arrived. But Kane knew silence could be more dangerous than threats. Silence meant they were watching, waiting, deciding whether he was a problem that needed solving or a loose end that would tie itself. He reported for duty at 700 hours like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. He moved through morning formation, seeing shadows where there had been none before, wondering which of his fellow Marines might be reporting back to someone in a dark office somewhere. Paranoia was a survival tool when the threat was real. Staff Sergeant Dylan Reeves found him during the mid-morning break, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. The younger Marine's usual swagger had been replaced by something harder to read. Curiosity mixed with unease, the look of a man who'd seen something that didn't fit his understanding of the world. "You got a minute, Gunny?" Reeves asked, using the informal address Marines reserved for gunnery sergeants they respected. Kane took the offered coffee and nodded toward a quiet corner of the motor pool where they could talk without being overheard. Reeves glanced around like he was checking for surveillance, then spoke in a voice pitched low. "I've been thinking about yesterday, about that woman, about that shot." "What about it?" "I've been shooting competitively for 8 years. I've seen the best in the world. Nobody makes that shot with that equipment under those conditions. Nobody. The math doesn't work. The rifle was wrong. The scope was wrong. She didn't even use a spotter. It's impossible. Kane sipped his coffee, waiting. Reeves wasn't looking for confirmation of the impossible. He was looking for an explanation. So I started digging, Reeves continued. Online forums, sniper communities, places where guys talk about things that don't make the official record. And I found something. He pulled out his phone, checked again to make sure they were alone, and showed Kane a screenshot from what looked like a military contractor message board. The post was from 2018, the username deleted, but the content preserved. Read it, Reeves said. Kane read. The post described an incident in Syria, a convoy of private military contractors pinned down by enemy fire in a valley north of Al-Hasaka. Air support was 20 minutes out. They were taking casualties. Then, according to the post, someone started dropping enemy positions from a ridge 3 kilometers away. Clean headshots, one after another, 7 kills in 4 minutes. The convoy extracted with only 2 wounded instead of the total wipeout they'd been facing. The contractor who'd written the post claimed he'd hiked up to that ridge afterward, found nothing except a single spent casing, described it as hand-loaded, custom brass, with a mark he'd never seen before. A triangle inside a broken circle. Kane's blood went cold. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket where the casing from yesterday rested like a talisman against forgetting. That's not all, Reeves said, swiping to another screenshot. There's at least 4 other incidents I found. Different locations, different years, but always the same pattern. Impossible shots at extreme range. No identification. Single spent casings with that same mark. Whoever she is, she's been doing this for years, and someone's been scrubbing the records clean. Kane handed the phone back, his mind racing through implications. Maya Cross wasn't just skilled. She was operational, active, still in the game despite whatever had happened with Project Longshot, which meant she was either working for someone or working against them. Either way, she was dangerous to know and more dangerous to ignore. Why are you telling me this? Kane asked. Reeves was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words too big to swallow. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old pain barely healed. My brother died in a training accident. David Reeves, Marine Scout sniper, 2012. They said he fell during a night navigation exercise. Broke his neck, but David was the best natural climber I ever knew. He didn't fall, and the official report had inconsistencies that never got explained. My family tried to push for a real investigation, but we got stonewalled. Eventually we gave up because we didn't have any proof of anything except bad luck. He looked at Kane directly, and in his eyes was the kind of hurt that turns men into either crusaders or cynics. Yesterday, when that woman made her shot, when everyone was freaking out, I saw something. You picked up her spent casing, and the way your face changed when you looked at it. You recognized something, so I'm asking you straight. Do you know who she is? And does it have anything to do with what happened to my brother? Kane made a decision in that moment that he knew might cost him everything. But Reeves deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as Kane understood. Some debts could only be paid in honesty. What I'm about to tell you stays between us. No written records, no phone calls. You don't repeat it even if someone puts a gun to your head. Understand? Reeves nodded. That woman's name is Maya Cross. Her father was Dr. James Cross, a civilian ballistics contractor who taught at Quantico back in 2006. Best instructor I ever had. He died in what they called a car accident. I think he was murdered. And I think it was because he knew about a program that shouldn't exist. A program that trained children to be snipers. Kane watched Reeves's face carefully as he laid out what he knew. The USB recording, Project Longshot. The children recruited between 2003 and 2005. 10 of them, all vanished from official records by 2012. When he finished, Reeves stood completely still, his coffee forgotten and cooling in his hand. His voice came out strangled. Children. They trained children. That's what Dr. Cross said in his recording. David died in 2012. He was 20 years old, but if they recruited kids starting in 2003, Reeves did the math and Kane saw the moment comprehension hit like a physical blow. He would have been 14, 15. The right age. It's possible. It's not possible. It's the truth. That's why they killed him. He was part of it. And when they shut down the program, they eliminated the evidence, all of it, including my brother. Reeves's hands were shaking. Kane gave him space to process, knowing the shape grief takes when it finds a target after years of aimless floating. Anger was easier than sorrow. Anger had direction. "We need proof," Reeves said finally. "We need hard evidence, names, documents, something that can't be denied or buried." Agreed, but going after proof is dangerous. People died to keep this quiet. They'll kill again. Then we better be smart about it. Reeves met Kane's eyes. "I'm in, whatever it takes. David deserves justice, and those kids deserve someone to tell their story." Kane nodded slowly. He'd just gained an ally or signed both their death warrants. Possibly both. But either way, he wasn't alone anymore. First step is finding Maya Cross. She's the evidence that walks and breathes. If we can find her, we can protect her and learn what she knows. Any idea where she went? None, but she drove off in a civilian vehicle, which means she's living under an assumed identity somewhere. The question is whether we can track her before whoever sent me that warning does. They agreed to split the work. Reeves would continue digging through online records, looking for other incidents that matched Maya's pattern. Kane would use his instructor contacts at Quantico to quietly inquire about Dr. Cross's old files, see what, if anything, had been preserved. They separated casually, just two Marines grabbing coffee and shooting the breeze. But Kane felt the weight of conspiracy settling over him like a cloak. He was committed now. The only way out was through. The rest of the day passed in a fog of routine that felt surreal. Kane taught a class on range estimation to junior Marines, the words coming automatically while his mind worked on other problems. He filed reports, attended meetings, played the role of a gunnery sergeant who had nothing more pressing on his mind than training schedules and equipment maintenance. But that night, alone in his quarters, he started the real work. The USB drive from Dr. Cross had contained only the audio confession. But Kane remembered something from his time studying under the doctor. Cross had kept meticulous notes, handwritten journals filled with calculations and observations and the kind of detailed thinking that made him brilliant. When he died, those journals should have gone somewhere. To his estate, to his next of kin, to an archive. Kane started with the official record. A simple search showed that Dr. James Cross had been employed by a private defense contractor called Meridian Solutions when he died. The company had folded in 2009, acquired by a larger firm, which itself had been bought out twice since. Following that chain of ownership was like trying to track water through sand. Everything legitimate ended in dead ends and dissolved LLCs. But Kane had learned patience from years of hunting targets that didn't want to be found. He shifted tactics. Instead of following the company, he followed the man. Dr. Cross had published academic papers in ballistics journals, had presented at conferences, had a life that left traces beyond his classified work. 3 hours of searching turned up an obituary from a small Virginia newspaper. Survived by a sister, Rebecca Cross of Charlottesville. No mention of children, which fit with Project Longshot's need for secrecy. Maya would have been erased from her father's official life. Kane found a current address for Rebecca Cross through public records. She'd be in her 70s now if she was still alive. A long shot, but long shots were all he had. He drafted a careful letter. Nothing digital that could be intercepted. Old-fashioned paper and pen, the kind of communication that felt appropriate for contacting the past. "Dear Ms. Cross, you don't know me, but I was a student of your brother James at Quantico in 2006. He was the finest instructor I ever had, and his death was a loss I still feel. I'm writing because I recently encountered someone who I believe may have been connected to your brother's work. I'm trying to understand what happened to him and why. If you're willing to speak with me, I would be grateful for any time you could spare. This is not official business. This is personal." He included his phone number and mailed the letter from a post office in Barstow, paying cash, using no return address that could track back to Fort Irwin. Then he waited. Waiting was its own kind of torture. Every day that passed was a day for the people behind Project Longshot to move against Maya, against him, against anyone who might threaten their secrets. Kane went through the motions of duty while his mind played out scenarios. Most of them ended badly. 4 days after he mailed the letter, his phone rang at 2200 hours. Unknown number. He let it ring 3 times while he moved to the window, checked the parking lot, saw nothing unusual. Then he answered. "This is Kane. Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Kane?" The voice was female, elderly, with the crisp diction of someone who'd been a teacher or librarian. Yes, ma'am. This is Rebecca Cross. I received your letter. You said you knew my brother. I did. He taught me advanced ballistics in 2006. Best instructor I ever had. There was a pause. Kane could hear her breathing, considering, weighing whether to trust him. James died in March of 2006. The police said it was an accident. I never believed that. My brother was the most careful driver I knew, and the week before he died, he called me. Late at night. He sounded frightened. He said if anything happened to him, I should know that he'd tried to do the right thing. He said he had a daughter, which shocked me because I didn't know. He made me promise that if she ever contacted me, I would help her. Then he said goodbye like he knew it was the last time we'd speak. Kane's heart was hammering. Did she ever contact you, the daughter? No, never. I waited for years, put my address in various databases, thinking maybe she'd search for family. Nothing. After a while, I convinced myself James had been confused, or it was some classified thing I wasn't supposed to understand, but I never forgot his voice that night, the fear in it. Ms. Cross, I think your niece is alive. I think I met her 4 days ago, and I think she's in danger from the same people who killed your brother. The silence that followed was heavy with 18 years of grief and unanswered questions. What do you want from me? Rebecca Cross asked finally. Anything James might have left behind, papers, notes, personal effects, anything that might help me understand what he was involved in and how to protect his daughter. The police returned his personal effects to me after the accident. There wasn't much. His work materials all belonged to his employer. But there was one thing, a storage unit key. I paid the fees for years, thinking maybe it was important. But I never went there. I was afraid of what I might find. Kane gripped the phone tighter. Where is the unit? Fredericksburg. I'll text you the address and the unit number. But Mr. Kane, if you're right, if James was murdered and his daughter is in danger, then you need to be careful. Whoever did this doesn't leave loose ends. I understand, ma'am. Thank you. Find her, Rebecca Cross said, her voice breaking. Find her and tell her that her aunt never stopped hoping she was alive. Tell her she has family if she wants it. The call ended. 2 minutes later, a text arrived with an address in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and a storage unit number. Kane stared at it, knowing that opening that unit would be crossing a line from speculation into active investigation. He'd be committing himself fully to a path that could end his career or his life. He thought about Maya Cross driving away into the desert, alone with secrets that had cost her childhood and father. He thought about David Reeves and the other children whose names he didn't know, buried in unmarked graves or living under assumed identities, their stories erased. He booked a flight to Virginia for his next leave period, starting in 6 days. While Kane worked his angle, Dylan Reeves was pursuing his own investigation with the focused intensity of a man who'd found purpose in grief. He'd created multiple anonymous accounts on military forums, asking careful questions about unusual sniper activity, unexplained long-range kills, ghost operators who appeared and vanished like smoke. What he found was a pattern, fragmentary, contradictory, but there. Reports from contractors in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, even domestic incidents in remote parts of the American Southwest. Impossible shots at impossible ranges. No claims of credit, no bodies left behind except the targets. Just the work itself, clean and professional, and utterly untraceable. But Reeves found something else too, a pattern of deaths. In 2013, a former CIA operations officer named Thomas Brennan died in a home invasion in McLean, Virginia. Nothing taken, no suspects, classified as random violence. In 2015, a military psychiatrist named Dr. Ellen Rostov died in a hiking accident in the Shenandoah Valley. She'd specialized in adolescent psychological conditioning. Her research papers had all been classified after her death. In 2017, a logistics coordinator named Paul Greenberg died of an apparent heart attack at age 42. He'd worked for the same defense contractor that had employed Dr. Cross. Each death was officially unrelated. Each occurred in a different jurisdiction. But Reeves saw the thread connecting them. They'd all been connected to programs that didn't exist, working for agencies that didn't acknowledge them, dying in ways that raised questions but never led to answers. Someone was cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might talk about Project Longshot or whatever it had become. The only question was whether the killer was working for the program or against it. Reeves compiled everything into an encrypted file and sent it to Kane with a single-line message. They're still active, and they're still killing. Kane read through Reeves's research in his quarters, the pieces assembling into a picture that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just historical conspiracy. This was ongoing operations, which meant Maya Cross wasn't just a survivor of a defunct program. She was either a target or an asset, possibly both. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. Kane's hand moved instinctively to the sidearm he'd started carrying even off duty. He answered without speaking, waiting to see who was on the other end. Gunnery Sergeant Kane. The voice was male, calm, with the kind of authority that didn't need to raise its volume. We need to talk about your recent activities. Who is this? Someone who's been watching you make some very dangerous inquiries. You've been asking about Dr. James Cross, about Maya Cross, about incidents that are classified above your pay grade and beyond your need to know. I'm calling to give you an opportunity to walk away. Kane moved to his window, looking out at the dark base, wondering where the watcher was. And if I don't, then you'll join Dr. Cross and the others who couldn't leave the past alone. We don't want to hurt you, Sergeant. You're a good Marine with a distinguished record, but you're interfering with national security operations. Stand down. Which operations exactly? The ones that train children to kill? The ones that murdered anyone who tried to expose it? A pause. When the voice came back, it had lost its patience. You have 24 hours to delete everything you found, stop your investigation, and forget you ever saw Maya Cross. If you don't comply, there will be consequences. This is your only warning. The line went dead. Kane stood holding his phone, his reflection ghostly in the dark window. They were escalating, which meant he was getting close to something they couldn't afford to have exposed. He called Reeves immediately. We need to meet, now, off base. 30 minutes later, they sat in Kane's truck in a Walmart parking lot in Barstow, the fluorescent lights creating islands of illumination in the desert night. Kane related the phone call. Reeves listened without interrupting, his face hardening with each detail. So what do we do? Reeves asked when Kane finished. We accelerate. I'm flying to Virginia tomorrow instead of waiting for leave. I'll use emergency family business as the excuse. You keep researching, but be more careful. Use VPNs, rotate accounts. Assume everything you do online is being monitored. What are you expecting to find in Virginia? Dr. Cross's storage unit. Whatever he thought was important enough to hide but couldn't bring himself to destroy. And if they're watching that too, then we'll know we're on the right track. Reeves nodded slowly. I want to come with you. No, we split up. We're harder to contain. Besides, someone needs to maintain normal routines here. Make it look like we got scared and backed off. You really think that'll work? No, but it might buy us time. They sat in silence for a moment, two Marines who'd signed up to serve their country, now wondering if their country was worth the cost of its secrets. My brother was 16 when he died, Reeves said quietly. 16 years old, and they turned him into a weapon and then threw him away. I need to know why. I need to know it meant something. Kane understood. Meaning was the only thing that made loss bearable. Without it, grief became a wound that never healed. We'll find out, Kane promised. Whatever it takes. They drove back to base separately. Kane packed a small bag with civilian clothes and essentials. He wrote a letter to be opened only if he didn't return, detailing everything he knew about Project Longshot, and left it with a lawyer in San Diego who specialized in military cases. Then he requested emergency leave citing a family medical situation. The approval came through faster than normal, which made Kane suspicious. Either his command was being helpful, or someone wanted him off base where he'd be easier to monitor. Either way, he was committed. At 600 hours the next morning, he drove away from Fort Irwin in his truck, heading east. He took a deliberately indirect route, stopping frequently, doubling back, using every counter-surveillance technique he'd learned in 2 decades of military service. By the time he reached the airport in Las Vegas, he was reasonably certain he wasn't being followed. But reasonable certainty wasn't the same as safety. He bought his ticket with cost, used a fake ID he'd acquired years ago for undercover work that had never happened, and boarded a flight to Richmond under the name Michael Torres. Somewhere over Kansas, flying through clear skies at 35,000 feet, Kane looked out the window at the vast American landscape below and thought about Maya Cross. Was she down there somewhere, hiding in plain sight, watching the same clouds? Did she know that people were looking for her? Did she care? And more importantly, when he finally found her, would she see him as ally or enemy? A Marine trying to help, or just another threat in a lifetime of threats? He didn't have answers. All he had was Dr. Cross's last message echoing in his memory. Protect her from Voss. Senator Richard Voss, former CIA, current chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, one of the most powerful men in Washington. If he was the architect of Project Longshot, then Kane was going up against someone who could destroy him with a phone call. But David Reeves had been 16. Maya Cross had been 14. Children turned into weapons by men who valued efficiency over humanity. Some things were worth the risk. Some fights were worth losing everything. Kane closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that when he landed in Virginia, he'd be stepping into a past that powerful people had worked very hard to erase. A past that had killed Dr. Cross and might kill him too. But he also knew that truth had a way of surviving, buried deep, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to dig it up. And Marcus Kane had just picked up a shovel. 3 rows behind him on the plane, a woman in a business suit lowered her magazine and sent a brief text message. Subject is en route to Virginia. Proceed to phase 2. The response came back immediately. Understood, activating echo. The woman deleted both messages, returned to her magazine, and continued her flight like she was just another traveler going about ordinary business. But in the cargo hold below, her checked luggage contained items that had nothing to do with ordinary travel. Items designed for surveillance, interdiction, and if necessary, permanent solutions to temporary problems. The game was accelerating. The players were moving into position, and somewhere in the American Southwest, a woman who'd been taught to kill before she learned to drive felt the old familiar tingle of being hunted. Maya Cross stood in the doorway of her trailer in Patagonia, Arizona, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of blood and copper. Her dog, Ballistic, pressed against her leg, whining softly. Animals knew when something was wrong before humans did. She'd felt it for 3 days now. The weight of eyes she couldn't see, the displacement of air that meant someone had been in her space. Small things. A book moved slightly on her shelf, dust patterns disturbed on her windowsill, the kind of details only someone who'd lived in paranoid isolation for 18 years would notice. They'd found her, which meant Fort Irwin had been a mistake. She should have stayed hidden, should have resisted the temptation to prove she still existed, still mattered, still could do the impossible. But part of her had wanted to be seen. After 18 years of being a ghost, sometimes you needed to remind yourself you were real. Now she'd pay for that moment of weakness. They were coming, and she had to decide whether to run again or finally stand and fight. She reached for the Winchester, her hand finding the familiar wood like greeting an old friend. The rifle had been her father's gift and his curse, the tool of her survival and the chain that bound her to a past she couldn't escape. Soon, she whispered to the desert, to the approaching night, to the ghost that never stopped following. Soon it ends, one way or another. And in the last light of day, the triangle inside the broken circle on her rifle's stock seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, keeping time with something ancient and unstoppable. The rhythm of debts coming due and stories demanding their ending. The storage unit sat on the eastern edge of Fredericksburg, Virginia, in a facility that looked like it had been there since the Cold War. Cinder block walls painted industrial beige, chain link fencing crowned with razor wire, security cameras that might have worked or might have been empty boxes meant to discourage theft. Marcus Kane arrived just after dawn when the morning light was still soft and the facility manager was unlocking the office. He had driven from Richmond in a rental car, paid cash, gave a false name, every precaution he could think of. But he knew that if they were serious about stopping him, precautions would not matter. You could not hide from people who had access to satellite surveillance and NSA data streams. The best he could hope for was that they were still deciding whether he was worth killing. The manager was a veteran. Kane could tell from the bearing and the faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. The man looked at the unit number Kane gave him and raised an eyebrow. 237. That one's been paid up for almost 20 years. Same person too. Never missed a payment. Never came to visit. You her? Family matter, Kane said, which was true enough. Need to see ID and the key. Kane showed his fake ID and produced the key Rebecca Cross had mailed him. The manager studied both, comparing the name on the ID to something in his computer, then shrugged and handed back the key. Building C, 3rd floor. Elevator's busted, so you'll have to take stairs. You need help moving anything heavy, you're on your own. Kane climbed 3 flights of concrete stairs in the morning heat, his footsteps echoing in the stairwell. Building C smelled like dust and mouse droppings and the accumulated weight of forgotten things. Storage units lined both sides of a narrow corridor lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. Most of the doors showed signs of regular use, fresh padlocks, recent scuff marks, but Unit 237 looked untouched. The padlock was old enough to have surface rust. Cobwebs connected the door to the frame. Kane used the key. The lock resisted, then clicked open with the sound of metal remembering its purpose. He pulled the rolling door up, the mechanism shrieking in protest, and stepped into Dr. James Cross's hidden archive. The unit was 10 feet by 10 feet, climate-controlled, packed floor to ceiling with plastic storage bins. Each bin was labeled in the doctor's precise handwriting: dates, subjects, numbers. Kane pulled down the first bin and opened it. Research papers, hundreds of them. Academic journals on ballistics, fluid dynamics, material science, all heavily annotated in the margins with Cross's notes. Calculations that went beyond the published findings, questions that challenged assumptions, the work of a mind that could not stop analyzing, could not accept limits. Kane moved to another bin. This one contained notebooks, the handwritten journals Cross had kept throughout his career. Kane opened one at random and found entries from 2004, teaching notes from Quantico, observations about students. Then, starting in June of that year, the entries changed. They approached me today. Two men in suits that cost more than my monthly salary. They knew everything about me, my work, my family's situation, my sister Rebecca. They knew I was raising my daughter alone after the divorce. They said they had an opportunity, a chance to serve my country in a way that would change warfare forever. All I had to do was consult on a theoretical program. No actual implementation. Just provide expertise. The money they offered would secure Maya's future. College, graduate school, everything I couldn't provide on a teacher's salary. I should have said no. God help me, I should have walked away. Kane's hands were shaking as he turned pages. The entries became more frequent, more detailed, more anguished. The children arrived today, 10 of them, ages 11 to 14. They told me these were volunteers, gifted youth from military families who wanted to serve early. But I saw their eyes. These kids have seen trauma, abuse, neglect. They're not volunteers. They're victims being given a purpose to replace their pain. And I'm the one who's supposed to turn that pain into precision. Kane had to stop reading. He stood in the stale air of the storage unit, breathing hard, fighting the urge to put the notebook down and walk away. But he forced himself to continue. Maya is one of them now. They said it would be safer if she trained with the others, that I could supervise, protect her, make sure nothing happened. I agreed because I'm a fool and a coward. She's 14 years old and I'm teaching her to calculate windage and bullet drop instead of helping her with algebra homework. What kind of father does this? The entries went on for months. Descriptions of training protocols that made Kane's stomach turn. Children running obstacle courses carrying rifles bigger than they were. Sleep deprivation exercises. Psychological conditioning designed to remove hesitation and doubt. And through it all, Dr. Cross's growing horror at what he had become part of. Asset 01 made a kill shot at 1,800 meters today. She's 17 years old. Her name is Sarah. She's Maya's training partner. The two of them push each other to be better, faster, more accurate. Sarah protects Maya from the harder conditioning. She's like an older sister. But I see what this program is doing to her, to all of them. We're not creating soldiers. We're creating something else, something that shouldn't exist. Kane found another notebook, this one from 2006. The entries were shorter now, more desperate. I told Voss I wanted out, that this had gone too far. He smiled at me like I was a child who didn't understand adult conversations. He said the program was too valuable to stop, that these children would prevent wars, save American lives, accomplish missions impossible for conventional forces. He said I'd signed ND, as that would put me in prison for 40 years if I talked. Then he asked about Rebecca, asked if she was still teaching at that elementary school in Charlottesville. The message was clear. The final entry was dated March 15th, 2006. I've made contact with a journalist, Philip Warren from the Washington Post. We're meeting tomorrow night. I'm bringing copies of everything. Training records, psychological evaluations, financial documentation. Enough evidence to blow this whole operation wide open. I know this will destroy me. I'll go to prison. I'll lose Maya, but I can't let this continue. These children deserve childhoods, not crosshairs. If you're reading this, Rebecca, and I pray you never have to, then know that I tried to do the right thing in the end. Tell Maya I love her. Tell her none of this was her fault. Tell her to run and never look back. Dr. James Cross died 2 days later. Philip Warren, the Washington Post journalist, died in a mugging 3 weeks after that. Both deaths ruled coincidental. Kane sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of a good man's descent into hell, and felt rage building in his chest like pressure in a sealed container. This was not just conspiracy theory. This was documented fact. Names, dates, details that could be verified. Everything needed to expose Project Longshot and destroy everyone involved. But he also knew that evidence only mattered if it could be presented without getting the presenter killed first. He needed to be smart about this, methodical. He needed copies, multiple copies, distributed to people who would know what to do with them. He spent the next 6 hours photographing every page of every journal, thousands of photos. His phone's battery died twice and he had to use the rental car to recharge. By the time he finished, the sun was setting and his back ached from hunching over bins and notebooks. But he had it all. The complete record of Project Longshot from inception to cover-up. The names of every child involved. The financial trail showing money flowing from CIA black budgets through shell companies. Dr. Cross's personal observations about the psychological damage being done. Everything. As Kane was packing the notebooks back into their bins, his phone rang. Dylan Reeves calling from California. Kane, we have a problem. What kind of problem? I found something. Another incident, but this one's different. This one's from last week, Colorado Springs. 3 people dead in what the police are calling a home invasion. But I pulled news footage from the scene. The victims were all headshots, professional grade, and the house belonged to a woman named Margaret Talbot. She was a psychiatric nurse who worked for the DOD from 2003 to 2007. Kane's blood went cold. She worked for Project Longshot. That's what I'm thinking. And if someone's killing witnesses from 20 years ago, that means they're cleaning house, getting rid of anyone who could testify. How many potential witnesses are we talking about? I've identified 7 people who worked in support roles for the program. Nurses, guards, logistics coordinators. 4 of them are already dead. Deaths over the past 10 years that I can verify. That leaves 3 alive. In Kane, I found something else. One of the remaining 3 is a woman named Linda Chen. She lives in Seattle, and according to her old employment records, she was the medical officer responsible for administering experimental drugs to program participants. Kane thought about Dr. Cross's journal entries, the references to psychological conditioning, drug regimens designed to enhance focus and suppress fear responses. If Linda Chen had records of what was given to those children, that would be evidence of human experimentation. We need to reach her before they do, Kane said. Can you get me contact information? Already got it. Sending it to you now. But Kane, there's something else. I've been monitoring chatter on some of the darker military contractor forums. There's talk about a contract that just got activated, high-value target elimination. No details on who the target is, but the contractor goes by the call sign Echo. Echo, the name from the text message the woman on Kane's plane had sent, activating Echo. What do we know about this Echo? Nothing. The name appears in exactly 3 places online, all heavily encrypted forums. Whatever Echo is, it's not officially acknowledged. Black Ops. Maybe darker than that. Kane made a decision. I'm flying to Seattle tonight. You stay in California and maintain normal routine. If they're watching us, I want them thinking you backed off. And what are you going to do? I'm going to find Linda Chen and get her somewhere safe. Then I'm going to find Maya Cross and tell her what I know. She deserves to understand what was done to her and who did it. He ended the call and started carrying bins down to his rental car. He could not take everything, but he took the journals and the most damning documents. Enough to prove the story, enough to make sure the truth survived even if he did not. As Kane was loading the last bin into his trunk, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Tinted windows, government plates. 2 men in dark suits got out and walked toward him with the casual confidence of people who were used to being obeyed. Kane's hand moved to the concealed carry pistol at his hip, but the men stopped 10 feet away, hands visible and empty. "Gunnery Sergeant Kane," the taller one said. We need you to stop what you're doing. Who are you? People who are trying to prevent you from making a fatal mistake. The materials in that storage unit are classified. Removing them is a federal crime. We're prepared to overlook your actions if you return the documents and cease your investigation. And if I don't? The shorter man smiled without humor. Then you'll be arrested for theft of classified materials. Your military career will end in disgrace. You'll spend the next 20 years in Leavenworth. Or if you continue to be difficult, you'll have an accident, just like Dr. Cross did. Kane looked at them both carefully. They had the bearing of operators, former military, now working private security for whoever wanted Project Longshot buried. Dangerous men, but men who were following orders, not making their own decisions. You want these documents? Kane said slowly. Come and take them. He drew his pistol in one smooth motion, not pointing it at them, but making it clear the conversation had changed parameters. The two men tensed but did not reach for their own weapons. A Mexican standoff in a storage facility parking lot as the sun set over Virginia. You really want to do this? The taller man asked. You're one Marine with a sidearm. We have resources you can't imagine. You can't win this fight. Maybe not, but I can make it expensive. Those documents are already uploaded to secure servers. Multiple copies, multiple locations. If anything happens to me, they go to every news outlet in the country. Your only choice is to let me walk away. It was a bluff. He had not had time to upload anything yet, but they did not know that. The two men looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then the shorter one pulled out a phone and made a call, speaking too quietly for Kane to hear. He listened for a moment, nodded, and ended the call. You have 24 hours, he said to Kane. After that, the offer expires and you become a problem that gets solved permanently. Walk away now and you might survive this. They got back in their SUV and drove away, but Kane knew they were not leaving. They would be watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. He loaded the last of the documents and drove away from the storage facility, checking his mirrors constantly, planning his next moves. He could not go to the airport. They would be watching. Could not go to a hotel. Too easy to trap. He needed to disappear long enough to get the documents uploaded and make contact with Maya Cross. He drove to a truck stop outside Fredericksburg and bought a burner phone with cash. Then he found an internet cafe and spent 2 hours uploading encrypted copies of every photo he had taken to 3 different secure cloud servers. He sent access credentials to Dylan Reeves and to Rebecca Cross and to a lawyer he trusted in San Diego. Insurance. If he died, the truth would still come out. By the time he finished, it was past midnight. Kane sat in his rental car in the truck stop parking lot, exhausted and wired on coffee and adrenaline. He needed to get to Seattle, needed to reach Linda Chen before Echo did. But he also knew that flying commercial would make him too easy to track. He sent a text to Reeves from the burner phone. Need alternative transport to Seattle. Know anyone who can help? The response came back 10 minutes later. Friend runs charter service out of Richmond Executive Airport. Owes me a favor. Give him this number. Kane made the call. An hour later, he was wheels up in a 6-seat Cessna, heading west through the darkness, carrying the evidence that could destroy powerful people and wondering if he was brave or just suicidal. Somewhere over Kansas, flying at 12,000 feet through clear night skies, Kane allowed himself to think about what came next. He had the evidence. He had witnesses he could protect. But he did not have the most important piece. He did not have Maya Cross. Where was she? What was she doing? Did she know people were dying to keep her story buried? Did she care? He thought about her at Fort Irwin, the way she had moved with such certainty, the emptiness in her eyes when she had asked, "Does it matter?" A woman who had been a ghost for so long, she had forgotten how to be anything else. Kane pulled out his phone and looked at the photos he had taken of Dr. Cross's journals. Found the entries about Maya specifically. Read them in the dim light of the plane's cabin. Maya asked me today why she has to do this. Why she can't just be normal. Go to school. Have friends. I didn't have an answer that didn't make me hate myself. So I told her the truth, that I made a terrible mistake and now we both have to live with it. She cried. I haven't seen her cry in 2 years. The program conditions them not to show weakness. She's 15 years old and she's forgetting how to cry. Kane closed his eyes and saw his own reflection in the dark window. A Marine who had spent 20 years serving his country, now discovering that his country had done things that made him question everything he had believed in. But he also saw an opportunity. a chance to do something that mattered, to protect someone who had never been protected, to give Maya Cross the choice her father had died trying to give her. The choice to be human instead of weapon. The plane landed in Seattle just before dawn. Kane thanked the pilot, paid him in cash, and took a cab to a diner near the Space Needle. He ordered breakfast he could not taste and used his phone to research Linda Chen. She lived in a condo in Capitol Hill, worked as a private nurse for wealthy clients, had no social media presence and very few digital footprints, a woman who had learned to be careful about visibility. Smart, but not careful enough if someone like Echo was hunting her. Kane needed a way to contact her that would not alert anyone watching. He could not just show up at her building, could not call from a traceable number. He needed to be smarter. He used his burner phone to send an encrypted email to an address Dylan had provided. Subject line, Dr. Cross's student needs to discuss old curriculum. The message was simple. Linda Chen, I have James Cross's journals. I know about Longshot. I know you're in danger. If you want to survive, meet me at Pike Place Market, Main Arcade, 1400 hours today. Come alone, watch for surveillance. He sent the message and waited. 2 hours passed, then his burner phone buzzed with a response. A single word. Confirmed. Kane spent the morning preparing. He bought a prepaid credit card and used it to rent a car under a false name. Drove the route to Pike Place Market 3 times, noting cameras, escape routes, choke points. If this was a trap, he would not walk into it blind. At 13:45 hours, he entered the market through the north entrance. The place was crowded with tourists and locals, the noise and chaos providing natural cover. He positioned himself near a fish vendor where he could see the main arcade but blend into the crowd. Linda Chen appeared at exactly 1400 hours, early 60s, Asian features, moving carefully, eyes scanning the crowd. She wore a long coat despite the mild weather, probably concealing a weapon. Smart. Kane let her stand alone for 5 minutes, watching to see if she had been followed, looking for the telltale signs of surveillance. Earpieces, coordinated movement, people who spent too much time looking at phones. He saw nothing obvious. He approached her from the side, speaking quietly. Ms. Chen, walk with me. We need to move. She turned to look at him, fear and defiance in equal measure on her face. How do I know you're really from Cross? He wrote that you administered drugs to the children, experimental compounds, memory suppressants, emotional regulators. He documented everything. And now the people who ran the program are cleaning house. Margaret Talbot in Colorado Springs last week. You're next unless you disappear right now. The fear in her eyes intensified. She nodded once and walked beside him as they moved through the market. Kane led her out a side exit to where his rental car was parked. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere they can't find you easily. I have a safe house arranged. But first, I need you to tell me everything you know, everything you did. I need the complete truth about Project Longshot. They drove south out of Seattle, taking back roads and watching for tails. Linda Chen sat in silence for the first 20 minutes. Then she started talking. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like poison being drawn from a wound. They brought them in young, so young. The psychological protocols were designed by Dr. Rostov. She said children's brains were more adaptable, more trainable. We could condition them to suppress fear responses, enhance focus, create perfect muscle memory. We used drugs, experimental compounds, things that hadn't been approved for adults, let alone children. What kind of drugs? Memory suppressants to reduce emotional attachment to past trauma, emotional regulators to dampen fear and enhance aggression when needed, stimulants to improve reaction time. Some of the children had severe side effects, hallucinations, personality changes. 2 of them tried to commit suicide. We were told to do whatever was necessary to keep them functional. Kane felt sick. And you did. Yes, God help me, yes. We told ourselves it was for national security, that these children would save countless lives, that we were creating something extraordinary. But really, we were just following orders and cashing paychecks and trying not to think too hard about what we were doing. Do you have records? Documentation of what was administered? I kept copies as insurance. I always knew this might come back. I have medical files on all 10 children, complete drug protocols, dosages, side effects, everything. They're in a storage facility. Kane felt a surge of hope. This was the evidence that could prove human experimentation. Combined with Dr. Cross's journals, it would be impossible to deny. We need to get those files now before they figure out where you are. Linda Chen gave him an address in Renton. They drove there in tense silence, both knowing that every minute increased the risk of discovery. The storage facility was smaller than the one in Virginia. Less security, easier access. Linda Chen led Kane to a unit on the ground floor and opened it to reveal filing boxes stacked neatly along one wall. She pulled out a box labeled 2005 to 2006 and opened it. Inside were medical records, thick files for each of the 10 children. Names Kane now knew from Dr. Cross's journals. Sarah Cross, David Reeves, Maya Cross. 7 others whose names meant nothing to him, but whose files told stories of systematic abuse dressed up as military necessity. Take them, Linda Chen said. Take all of it. I'm done carrying this weight. Kane started loading boxes into the car. As he lifted the 3rd box, he heard a sound. Not loud, just the whisper of a suppressed weapon cycling. He turned and saw Linda Chen falling, a small red hole in her forehead, already dead. Standing in the entrance to the storage unit was a woman, medium height, athletic build, dark hair pulled back, black tactical clothing, suppressed pistol in her hand. And Kane recognized the face from Dr. Cross's photographs. Sarah Cross, Asset 01. Echo. She pointed the weapon at Kane. Her voice was flat, emotionless. Step away from the boxes, Sergeant Kane. You're interfering with operational cleanup. Kane's hand moved slowly toward his sidearm, but Sarah's gun tracked him perfectly. Don't. I can put a round through your brainstem before you clear leather. We both know it. Kane froze. She was right. He had seen enough shooters to know when he was outmatched. Sarah Cross had been trained from childhood, had been conditioned to be faster, more accurate, more ruthless. He was a skilled Marine. She was something else entirely. Linda Chen was a target, Sarah continued. You are not currently a target. Remain non-threatening, and you'll survive this encounter. You're Sarah Cross, Kane said quietly. Maya's sister. Something flickered in her eyes, brief, barely perceptible. Then it was gone. That designation is not in my operational parameters. I am Echo. Asset 01 no longer exists. Maya thinks you're dead, has thought that for 12 years. What do you think that did to her? Asset 07's psychological state is not relevant to current mission objectives. Kane made a decision, a calculated risk that might save his life or end it. Your father left journals, documented everything about Project Longshot, including how you protected Maya, how you acted like her sister even when they were trying to condition it out of you. He wrote that you were the only one who showed her kindness. That's not programming, that's humanity. Sarah's hand wavered slightly. The first crack in the perfect weapon. Dr. James Cross was a program liability. His journals are not credible testimony. He loved you, both of you, and he died trying to save you from what they turned you into. Maya survived because you pushed her out of that building, told her to run. Do you remember that? Or did they erase that along with everything else that made you human? The gun was shaking now, just slightly. Sarah's breathing had become irregular. The conditioning was fighting something deeper, something that predated the drugs and the training. Her voice cracked. I don't remember. Memories prior to 2012 are fragmented, unreliable, possibly fabricated. They're not fabricated, they're real. You're real, Sarah Cross is real, and your sister is alive, and she's been hiding for 18 years because she thought she was alone. You're not alone, neither is she, but only if you choose to remember. For 10 long seconds, Sarah stood completely still. Kane could see the war happening behind her eyes, the programming battling against something human that refused to die completely. Then she lowered her weapon. Take the files, leave Seattle. I will not pursue, but Sergeant Kane, if we encounter each other again under different circumstances, I will execute mission parameters without hesitation. This mercy is a one-time exception. Don't make me regret it. Why are you letting me go? Because you said she's alive, Asset 07, Maya, and I need to know if that's true. If there's any possibility that the memories trying to surface are real and not just glitches in my conditioning. You're going to find her, and when you do, you're going to tell her that her sister isn't dead, just lost, and maybe, possibly, findable. Sarah holstered her weapon and stepped back into the shadows of the storage facility. Kane grabbed the boxes of medical records, loaded them into his car, and drove away, his hands shaking on the wheel. He had just survived an encounter with a professional killer by triggering memories she was not supposed to have. The conditioning was incomplete. Sarah Cross was still fighting to exist inside Echo's shell, which meant she could possibly be saved. But it also meant Maya needed to know immediately, needed to understand that her sister was alive and that finding her might be possible. Kane pulled into a gas station 5 miles away and used his burner phone to call Dylan Reeves. I need you to find Maya Cross. Use every resource you have. Call in every favor. I don't care what it takes. We need to reach her before anyone else does. What happened in Seattle? Linda Chen is dead, but I have the medical records, and Dylan, Sarah Cross is alive. She's Echo, and she's starting to remember who she used to be. We need to find Maya and tell her before this whole situation explodes. Kane ended the call and sat in the gas station parking lot, processing what had just happened. The conspiracy was unraveling faster than he had anticipated. The pieces were moving. The truth was spreading. And somewhere in the American Southwest, Maya Cross had no idea that everything she thought she knew about her past was about to change. The hunt was on, and the ghost line between weapon and human, between Echo and Sarah, was starting to blur in ways that terrified and inspired him in equal measure. Dylan Reeves sat in his quarters at Fort Irwin, staring at a photograph he had printed from his brother's personal effects. David at 17, wearing his Marine Corps dress blues, the pride so obvious in his eyes it hurt to look at. The photo had been taken 3 months before his death, before Project Longshot had decided he was a liability, before they had staged an accident and buried him with full military honors while lying to everyone about how he really died. Dylan had carried that photo through 2 deployments and 100 training exercises. It had been a reminder of loss. Now it was a reminder of something else. Purpose. His phone buzzed with a message from Kane. Linda Chen dead. Sarah Cross's Echo, alive and operational. Need to find Maya immediately. Her life depends on it. Dylan read the message 3 times to make sure he understood. Sarah Cross was alive. The girl David had talked about in his letters home. The one he had called his best friend in the program. The one who had supposedly died with him in that explosion. Alive. Turned into an assassin. And according to Kane, starting to remember who she used to be. The world had gone insane. Or maybe it had always been insane and Dylan was just now seeing it clearly. He erased the message and began working through the problem methodically. Where would Maya Cross hide? She had been off-grid for 18 years. No credit cards, no bank accounts, no official identity. But she had appeared at Fort Irwin 6 days ago, which meant she had been somewhere within driving distance. Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Southern California. Dylan pulled up his laptop and started searching property records in small towns throughout the Southwest. He was looking for recent cash purchases. Properties bought by single women with minimal digital footprints. It was like searching for a specific grain of sand on a beach, but he had learned patience from his brother. David's letters had taught him that some things were worth the endless hours of work. 3 hours later, he found something. A property in Patagonia, Arizona, purchased 14 months ago by a woman named Ellie Grant. No prior address, no employment history, no social media presence. The sale had been cash. 20 acres of desert with a double-wide trailer and a barn. The kind of place someone chose when they wanted to disappear. Dylan cross-referenced the name Ellie Grant with vehicle registrations. Found a 10-year-old Ford pickup registered to that name at that address. Then he did something that probably crossed legal lines. He accessed DMV records through a buddy who worked in law enforcement and pulled the driver's license photo for Ellie Grant. Dark hair, dark eyes, mid-30s, the same bone structure he had seen on the woman at Fort Irwin. Different name, different hairstyle, same person. He had found her. Dylan sent the address to Kane with a simple message. Located, Patagonia, AZ. Name is Ellie Grant. Going dark for 48 hours. Will provide backup if needed. Then he made a decision that would probably end his military career. He walked to the supply room and signed out a weapons kit, claiming he needed it for a training exercise. Packed a bag with civilian clothes and essentials. Left a note for his commanding officer claiming a family emergency in Arizona. If Kane was going to warn Maya Cross that her sister was hunting her, he would need someone watching his back. And Dylan Reeves owed his brother's memory more than sitting safely in California while the truth finally came out. Marcus Kane received Dylan's message while sitting in his rental car outside a motel in Oregon. He had been driving for 6 hours since leaving Seattle, taking a deliberately circuitous route to make sure he was not being followed. The medical records from Linda Chen's storage unit sat in boxes on the passenger seat, evidence of crimes that made his hands shake when he thought about them too long. He had also been thinking about Sarah Cross, about the way her hand had wavered when he mentioned Maya, about the crack in her conditioning that suggested the human being inside Echo's shell was still fighting to exist. She had let him live, had actively chosen mercy over mission parameters. That meant something. That meant she was salvageable. But it also meant she was dangerous in ways he had not fully anticipated. A weapon that was starting to make its own decisions. A ghost that was remembering it used to be human. The next time they met, Sarah might not hesitate, might execute her mission without the moment of doubt that had saved his life. Kane needed to reach Maya before Sarah's programming reasserted control. Before whoever ran, Echo sent her after her sister with orders that did not allow for mercy. He pulled up Dylan's message and studied the address in Patagonia. Small town, remote, perfect place to hide. It would take him another 12 hours of driving to get there. Too long, he needed to move faster. Kane made a call to the charter pilot who had flown him from Virginia to Seattle. The man answered on the second ring. Need another flight, Oregon to Southern Arizona. Tucson if possible. How soon can you be wheels up? Give me 4 hours, I'm in Portland doing a run. Can meet you at Medford Airport if you can get there. I'll be there. Kane drove to Medford, turned in his rental car, and waited in the small terminal. He used the time to review Dr. Cross's journals on his phone, looking for any additional details about Maya and Sarah's relationship. Anything that might help him understand what he was walking into. One entry stood out. Dated October 2006, 6 months after Dr. Cross's death, but written as if he knew he might not survive. Sarah is the strongest person I've ever met. Not physically, though she's formidable in that regard too. I mean psychologically. She endures the conditioning that would break most adults and still finds ways to be kind to the younger ones, especially Maya. She's taken my daughter under her wing in a way that fills me with gratitude and shame in equal measure. Gratitude because Maya needs that protection. Shame because my daughter needs protecting from a program I helped create. If anything happens to me, if they decide I'm too much of a risk, Sarah will try to save Maya. I've seen it in how she positions herself, how she takes extra punishments to shield the others. She's being trained to be a weapon, but she keeps choosing to be a guardian. That's the part they can't train out of her. The part that remembers what it means to care about someone beyond yourself. Kane read those words 3 times. Sarah had been a guardian even as they tried to turn her into a killer. That instinct had survived 12 years of conditioning, had surfaced in Seattle when she let him live, might be the key to bringing her back completely. The charter pilot arrived on schedule. 4 hours later, Kane was landing in Tucson as the sun set over the Sonoran Desert. He rented another car, this time keeping his real ID since he would need to be identified if things went wrong. Then he drove the hours south to Patagonia. The town was exactly what he expected. Population maybe 900. One main street with a general store, a post office, and a bar that looked like it had been serving the same customers since 1950. The kind of place where strangers were noticed, but minds stayed focused on their own business. Dylan's intel said Maya's property was 3 miles outside town, 20 acres of scrub and cactus with a double-wide trailer and a barn. Kane drove past it once without stopping, noting the layout. The trailer sat 50 yards back from the road. The barn was another 100 yards beyond that. A few outbuildings, a truck parked in front that matched the description of Maya's vehicle. But something felt wrong. The place was too quiet, too still. Kane had learned to trust his instincts through 2 decades of military service, and his instincts were screaming that this was not a safe approach. He drove another mile down the road and pulled over, sat thinking. If Maya was as skilled as everything suggested, she would have early warning systems, cameras, motion sensors, maybe even tripwires. Approaching the property directly would announce his presence before he got within 100 yards. He needed a different approach, something that would not trigger defensive protocols. Kane pulled out his burner phone and composed a careful text message to the number Dylan had pulled from Maya's property records. He had no idea if she would receive it or respond, but he had to try. Maya Cross, my name is Marcus Kane. I was a student of your father's at Quantico. I have his journals. I know about Project Longshot. I know about Sarah. We need to talk. I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to help. Please respond if you receive this. He sent the message and waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Nothing. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Kane. The voice was female, familiar. Maya Cross speaking for the first time since Fort Irwin. You've been making a lot of noise. People are noticing. Your sister is alive, Sarah. She's been alive this whole time. They turned her into an asset, call sign Echo. But she's starting to remember, starting to break through the conditioning. I met her in Seattle. She let me live because I told her you were alive. Silence on the other end. Kane could hear Maya breathing, processing, calculating whether to believe him or assume this was an elaborate trap. How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't some operation to flush me out? Because I have the medical records from Project Longshot, complete drug protocols, documentation of everything they did to you and the others. I have your father's journals where he wrote about how Sarah protected you, how she was the only one who showed you kindness when they were trying to condition it out of both of you. And I have a message from Sarah. She told me to find you, to tell you she's not dead, just lost, impossibly findable. Another long silence. When Maya spoke again, her voice was different, quieter, more vulnerable. Where are you? About a mile from your property. I didn't approach because I assumed you'd have security measures. Didn't want to get shot before we could talk. Smart. Stay where you are. I'll come to you. What are you driving? Kane described his Renault car. 15 minutes later, a figure appeared out of the darkness. Maya Cross moving through the desert like a shadow, arriving from a direction Kane had not been watching. She had circled around him, approached from his blind side, making sure he was alone before revealing herself. She appeared at his passenger window, Winchester slung over her shoulder, a pistol in her hand, but not quite pointed at him. Kane kept his hands visible on the steering wheel. Get out. Slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them. Kane complied. Maya backed up 3 steps, maintaining distance, the pistol now trained center mass. Professional. Careful. The movements of someone who had survived by never taking unnecessary risks. You said you have my father's journals. Prove it. Kane slowly pulled out his phone and showed her photos of Dr. Cross's handwriting. Entries that mentioned Maya by name. Details that no one outside Project Longshot could possibly know. Maya's face did not change expression, but Kane saw her hands tighten on the pistol. He wrote about me. He wrote about all of you, but especially you and Sarah. He was trying to protect you even as he participated in destroying you. The guilt ate him alive. That's why they killed him, because he was going to expose everything. And Sarah, you really saw her? Talked to her? She killed Linda Chen right in front of me. Was going to kill me too. But when I mentioned you, she hesitated. Let me take the evidence and leave. Told me to find you and tell you she was alive. Her exact words were maybe possibly findable, like she was trying to give you hope but could not quite bring herself to believe in it. Maya lowered the pistol slightly, not holstering it, not dropping her guard, but accepting that Kane might be telling the truth. Where are we supposed to have this conversation? Not here, not my property, somewhere neutral. There's a motel in Winslow, Route 66, called the Desert Rose. I can meet you there tomorrow. Bring the evidence. We can figure out next steps. Maya considered this, calculating risks, weighing options. Finally, she nodded. Winslow, Desert Rose Motel, room 23, 16 hours from now. Come alone. Come armed. Trust nothing. If this is a trap, you'll die first. Understand? Understood. She backed into the darkness and disappeared as silently as she had arrived. Kane stood in the desert night, listening to the sound of his own heartbeat, and realized he had just crossed a line he could not uncross. He had made contact, established trust, however fragile. Now he had to follow through. He drove back to Tucson and checked into a chain hotel under his real name. If they were tracking him, let them know where he was. Let them think he was being sloppy. Meanwhile, he would take every precaution to make sure the meeting in Winslow was not compromised. The next morning, Kane drove a deliberately complex route toward Winslow. He stopped at 3 different stores to buy supplies. Changed vehicles twice, swapping his rental for a different car at a used lot in Phoenix, paying cash. Bought a burner laptop and uploaded additional copies of all his evidence to new secure servers. If anything happened to him, the information would still get out. He reached Winslow 6 hours before the scheduled meeting. The Desert Rose Motel looked exactly as he had imagined it based on Maya's description. Dying. Forgotten. perfect for a clandestine meeting. He rented room 23 with cash and spent the next hours preparing. He set up his laptop with all the evidence organized and ready to show Maya. The medical records, the journals, everything. He also prepared a contingency. If this meeting went wrong, if either of them did not survive, he had dead man switches set up that would automatically release everything to multiple journalists. At exactly the appointed time, Kane heard a knock on the door. 3 short raps. He opened it to find Maya Cross standing there, looking older and more tired than she had the night before. The weight of 18 years of hiding was visible in her posture. She entered the room, scanned it professionally, then sat in the single chair, rifle across her lap. "Show me everything." Kane spent the next hour walking her through the evidence. The journals, the medical records, the timeline of Project Longshot from inception through cover-up. Maya sat in silence, absorbing it all, her face a mask that revealed nothing. When he finished, she spoke quietly. "My father felt guilty, documented his guilt, then got himself killed. What am I supposed to do with that legacy? Forgive him? Thank him? Hate him? I don't know, but I know he loved you, and I know he tried to fix his mistake. That has to count for something. Love isn't enough. He loved me and still helped turn me into this. If that's love, I'm not sure I want it." Kane leaned forward. "What happened to you was wrong, criminal, evil, no debate about that. But hiding forever doesn't fix it, doesn't punish the guilty or honor the dead. You want to make your father's death mean something? Testify, go public, burn down everyone who was involved. And then what? Become the poster child for military abuse? Spend my life in courtrooms? I've been invisible for 18 years. Maybe that's better than being visible as a freak. Better than being dead, which is where you're headed if they find you. Sarah might be starting to remember, but she's still Echo, still operational, still following orders. They will send her after you eventually, and next time she might not hesitate." Maya stood abruptly, moving to the window, looking out through a gap in the curtains. "Sarah won't find me unless I want to be found. I know how to stay hidden. You came out of hiding when you went to Fort Irwin. That was a mistake. You know it. I know it. And now they know you are active. Still a threat. They can't let you live. Then maybe it's time we settle it. Sister versus sister. See who our father trained better." The coldness in her voice was terrifying. Kane stood and moved to where she could see him. "You don't want to kill your sister. I don't want anything. Wanting is vulnerability. I exist. Execute, survive. Same as Sarah." "No, you're not the same. Sarah has been conditioned until she barely remembers being human. You remember, you feel that shot at Fort Irwin was not just skill. It was a statement, a way of saying you still exist and matter." Maya turned from the window. In the dim light, her eyes were dark pools of pain barely contained. "You know what the worst part is? I'm good at what they made me. Better than good. Perfect. And some small, sick part of me takes pride in that, in the skill, in being able to do things no one else can do. That's the real crime. They didn't just steal my childhood. They made me love the theft." Her voice cracked, the first real emotion Kane had heard. He understood then that he was not looking at a weapon pretending to be human. He was looking at a human pretending to be a weapon, because pretending was easier than feeling the full weight of what had been stolen. Kane's phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. "Federal tactical teams converging on Winslow. Multiple agencies. They tracked you through rental car. Evacuate immediately." Kane showed Maya the message. She read it and moved instantly, checking her own phone, pulling up what looked like a security camera feed. Black SUVs approaching from north and south. At least 12 operators. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they set up a perimeter. This location is blown." "How did they find us so fast?" "They probably had surveillance on your movements since Seattle. Waited to see where you led them. I should have anticipated this." Kane cursed himself. He had been careful but not careful enough. They had used him to find Maya, and now they were both trapped. "We need to move. Now. Is there a back way out of this town?" Maya was already packing. "There's a drainage culvert half a mile east. Runs under the highway. We can use it to reach my vehicle. I staged it 2 miles out in case I needed to evac fast." They moved through the back of the motel into the desert scrub. Maya led the way, using terrain and shadows for concealment. Behind them, Kane heard vehicles entering town. Professional voices on radios. A tactical team executing a capture operation. They reached the culvert and descended into darkness. The concrete tunnel smelled like rust and stagnant water. They moved quickly, hunched over, breathing hard. Kane's back screamed, but he kept moving because stopping meant capture. Emerging on the far side of the highway, they climbed through a wash and over a ridge. Maya's Jeep was exactly where she said it would be, hidden in an arroyo and covered with a camouflage tarp. They got in, and Maya drove without lights, using night vision equipment to navigate through terrain that would have killed a normal driver. Only when they were 10 miles from Winslow did she finally speak. "They'll follow, track us. We can't run forever. So we don't run, we end this, on our terms." Maya drove in silence for another few minutes before pulling over. "There's a place where Project Longshot was based, the original facility. It was supposed to be demolished in 2013, but the demolition was never completed. Site was abandoned, classified, fenced off. It's the last place they'd expect us to go." Kane stared at her. "You want to go back to where it all started?" "I want to end it where it started. If this is going to be a final confrontation, let it happen in the place where we were all destroyed. Seems fitting?" Her voice had gone cold again, distant, but Kane heard the logic in it. The facility would be neutral ground, defensible, full of meaning. If Sarah came for Maya, and Kane suspected she would eventually, better to face her there than be hunted through the desert. "Where is this facility?" "Nevada, middle of nowhere, about 4 hours from here if we drive fast." Kane thought about Dylan Reeves, about the evidence he carried, about the fact that if both he and Maya died in the desert, the truth might still get buried. He sent one final text to Dylan before destroying his burner phone. "Going to Site 7, original Longshot facility, Nevada, coordinates attached. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, release everything to every news outlet you can find. Make sure the story doesn't die with us." Then he turned to Maya. "Let's go finish this." They drove through the night, two people shaped by the same crime moving toward the same point of origin. Behind them, tactical teams were searching Winslow. Ahead of them, a facility that had been built to create ghosts waited in the darkness. And somewhere between the two, Sarah Cross was tracking her sister, following instincts that were part programming and part something deeper. Something human that remembered what it meant to protect someone you loved. The ghost line was about to be crossed one final time, and on the other side, there would either be justice or just more ghosts to haunt the desert. Night fell over the desert like a curtain dropping on the final act. The old Project Longshot facility sat in darkness, its broken windows reflecting starlight like the empty eyes of a corpse. Marcus Kane and Maya Cross moved through the ruins with flashlights, their beams cutting through shadows that had gathered undisturbed for over a decade. The main building's interior was a monument to abandonment. Peeling paint revealed concrete walls beneath. Doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Debris littered floors that had once been polished to military precision. But beneath the decay, Kane could see the bones of what this place had been. Classrooms, dormitories, a shooting range built into the hillside behind the complex. Everything needed to turn children into weapons without anyone outside these walls knowing they existed. Maya walked through it all with the stillness of someone touring a graveyard. She didn't speak, didn't react. Just moved from room to room like she was checking items off a list only she could see. Kane followed, giving her space, understanding that some journeys had to be made alone, even when you weren't physically alone. They reached what had been the main training room, a large space with acoustical tile ceiling, mostly collapsed now, equipment long since stripped away. But Maya stopped in the doorway and stared at the empty room for a full minute without moving. "This is where they taught us the difference between targets and people," she said finally, her voice echoing in the hollow space. "Targets don't have families, don't have futures, don't matter beyond the moment you pull the trigger. People are complications. Targets are simple. By the time we were 15, we couldn't see people anymore. Just targets wearing human shapes." Kane stood beside her, trying to imagine what it had been like. Children taught to see the world through crosshairs, taught that empathy was weakness and hesitation was failure. "Sarah was the best at it," Maya continued, "at shutting down the human parts. She used to tell me that caring was the only sin that mattered, that we'd been given a gift and caring would ruin it. She believed it too. That's what made her Asset 01. That's what made her perfect. And you never believed it." "I tried to believe it, wanted to believe it, but I kept having these moments where I'd see a target and think about who they might have been, who would miss them, whether they deserved what I was about to do. Sarah said those thoughts would get me killed. She wasn't wrong. Maya turned away from the training room and walked deeper into the facility. Kane followed her down a corridor lined with small rooms, dormitories, each one barely large enough for a bed and a locker. Prison cells disguised as military necessity. Maya stopped at the last door on the right. The number 07 was still barely visible, painted on the metal. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Kane waited in the hallway, giving her this moment of private remembrance. When Maya emerged 5 minutes later, her eyes were dry, but something in her face had changed. Hardened. Resolved. She'd made whatever peace was possible with the ghost of who she'd been. "She'll come through the main entrance," Maya said, all business now. "Sarah, Echo, whatever name she uses, she'll come straight in because subtlety is inefficient when you know your target is waiting. She'll expect an ambush. We'll have planned for every tactical advantage I might have prepared. This ends in shooting. No other way." There's always another way. Not for ghosts. Ghosts don't get redemption arcs. They get exorcised, or they haunt forever. Tonight we find out which. Kane wanted to argue, but knew it was pointless. Maya had been building toward this moment for 18 years. Ever since the night she ran from exploding buildings and thought her sister had died inside them. Every decision since then had been moving her toward this confrontation. He couldn't stop it any more than he could stop the sunrise. "Where do you want me?" Kane asked. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere you can witness what happens and survive to tell about it. The evidence you have only matters if someone lives to present it. That's not going to be me. Probably won't be Sarah either. But it could be you. I didn't come all this way to hide in a corner while you commit suicide by sister." Maya almost smiled. Suicide by sister. That's good. Accurate, too. But this isn't about dying. This is about ending something that should have ended 12 years ago. Sarah and I are echoes of the same crime. We can't both exist in the same world. One of us has to stop being real. Before Kane could respond, they heard it. The sound of a vehicle approaching. No headlights. Just the whisper of an engine moving slowly over rough ground. Sarah Cross had arrived. Maya's entire demeanor changed. The woman who'd been remembering childhood vanished, replaced by Asset 07. Every movement became economical, precise. She checked her Winchester one more time, chambered around, and moved to a position that gave her clear sight lines to the entrance while providing cover from return fire. Kane drew his sidearm and took position near a window where he could observe, but wouldn't be in the direct line of fire. His heart was hammering, his mouth was dry. He'd been in combat before, had faced enemy fire in 2 deployments. But this was different. This was watching 2 victims of the same crime prepare to kill each other because neither had been given tools to do anything else. The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the building. The engine cut. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the whisper of desert wind through broken structures. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then a door opened and closed with deliberate sound. Footsteps on gravel. Measured. Unhurried. The walk of someone who feared nothing because fear had been conditioned out of her nervous system. Sarah Cross appeared in the doorway like a materialization rather than an arrival. Black tactical clothing, no visible weapons, but Kane knew she was armed. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes scanned the interior with mechanical precision, cataloging threats and cover and firing angles in milliseconds. "Asset 07, Sarah said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Your location has been compromised. Surrender is recommended. Resistance will result in termination." Maya stepped out from behind cover, rifle at low ready, not quite pointing at her sister, but not quite pointing away either. "Hello, Sarah. It's been a long time." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Brief, barely perceptible. Then it was gone. "Asset 07 is not authorized to use that designation. I am Echo. Asset 01 no longer exists." That's what they told you. That's what they made you believe. But I remember Asset 01. I remember my sister. She used to sing to me when I had nightmares. Used to steal extra food from the commissary and sneak it to me. Used to take my punishments when I failed conditioning exercises. That person existed. That person was real. False memories, conditioning artifacts, irrelevant to mission parameters. Maya lowered her rifle slightly, not dropping her guard, just trying to reach through the programming to whatever remained underneath. "Do you remember the night of the explosion, 2012? October, you pushed me out of the building, told me to run, told me not to look back. Those were the last words my sister said to me. Run, little bird. Don't look back. Sarah's hand moved to her sidearm, drew it smoothly, pointed it at Maya, but her hand was shaking, just slightly. The first crack in the perfect weapon. Little bird, Sarah whispered, then louder, angry. That designation is not in my files, not in my memory. You're using psychological manipulation, attempting to compromise mission effectiveness. I'm trying to remind you who you were before they erased you. Sarah Cross, 17 years old, daughter of Dr. James Cross, sister to Maya Cross, human being with thoughts and feelings and choices. They tried to delete that person, but they failed. I can see her right now, fighting to get out, fighting to remember. Remembering is inefficient. The past is irrelevant. Only mission completion matters. But Sarah's gun hand was shaking harder now, tremors running through her arm like small earthquakes. The programming warring with whatever fragment of humanity still survived in the wreckage of her mind. Kane watched from his position, barely breathing. This was the moment. The inflection point where Sarah Cross would either break through Echo's conditioning or be consumed by it forever. And he was powerless to affect which way it went. They told me you died, Maya said, her voice softer now. That you sacrificed yourself to save me. For 12 years I believed I was alone. That everyone from Longshot was dead except me. Then I learned you were alive. That they'd turned you into Echo. And I had to decide whether to try to save you or put you down like a rabid dog. I'm still deciding. Then decide quickly. Hesitation is weakness. Weakness gets assets terminated. Stop calling yourself an asset. You're a person. You're Sarah. You're my sister. And I refuse to believe that 18 years of hell erased every trace of who you were. Sarah's trigger finger was tightening. Kane could see it. Could see the moment approaching when conditioning would override everything else, and Sarah would execute her mission because that's what Echo did. Echo eliminated targets, and Maya Cross was a target. Then Dylan Reeves burst through a side door, breathing hard, weapon drawn but not aimed at anyone. Both sisters spun toward him, rifles up, fingers on triggers. Kane shouted a warning, but Dylan was already speaking, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. Don't shoot. I'm not your enemy. I'm David's brother. David Reeves, Asset 03. He wrote to me about both of you. Before he died, before they killed him. Sarah's gun shifted toward Dylan. Her face showed the first real emotion Kane had seen. Confusion, pain, the emergence of something that might have been memory. Asset 03. Status, terminated. Training accident, 2012. It wasn't an accident, Dylan said, his voice breaking. They murdered him. Same as they murdered all the others when they decided to shut down the program. But before he died, he wrote me letters. Told me about the two of you. About Sarah, who was strong enough to protect everyone. About Maya, who was kind enough to remember they were human. He said if I ever met either of you, I should tell you he was sorry. Sorry he wasn't brave enough to fight back. Sorry he couldn't save you. Tears were streaming down Dylan's face now. A man confronting the living ghosts of his brother's stolen childhood. His brother's last words finally delivered 12 years too late. Sarah's gun was shaking violently. Her breathing had become ragged, uncontrolled. The perfect weapon developing flaws in real time. Asset 03 wrote letters, unauthorized communications, security violation. He was terminated for cause. He was murdered for being human. For remembering that you were all children who deserved better than what they did to you. And his last thought before they killed him was hoping that somehow, someday, the two of you would remember who you were before Project Longshot destroyed you. Something broke in Sarah then. Kane saw it happen. Saw the moment when conditioning couldn't hold back the flood of memories that had been damned for 12 years. She dropped her weapon, fell to her knees, began shaking like someone in the grip of a seizure. Maya moved forward, rifle forgotten, crossing the space between them. She knelt beside her sister and did something Kane would remember for the rest of his life. She reached out and pulled Sarah into an embrace, held her while she shook, while she made sounds that were half sobs and half the death rattle of Echo dying and Sarah Cross trying to be born again. I've got you, Maya whispered. Little bird's got you. I'm here. I'm here. Sarah's hands came up and gripped Maya's jacket like a drowning person gripping a life preserver. When she spoke, her voice was small and broken and young. The voice of a 17-year-old girl who'd been buried alive for 12 years. I remember. God help me, I remember everything. What they did, what they made us do, the children we killed for practice, the missions we ran while they told us we were saving the world. I remember David. I remember you. I remember singing to you. I remember pushing you out and telling you to run. I remember the explosion and waking up in a medical facility and they told me you were dead. That everyone was dead. That I was the only one who mattered anymore. That I was Echo now. That Sarah had died in the fire. She was sobbing now. 18 years of suppressed emotion pouring out in great racking heaves that shook her entire body. Maya held her through it all, rocking slightly, making small, soothing sounds, being the sister she'd been trained to forget how to be. Kane holstered his weapon and looked at Dylan, who was leaning against a wall with his face in his hands, crying for a brother who'd been dead for 12 years. 3 people bound together by the same crime. 3 survivors of different aspects of the same tragedy. And for the first time since any of this started, Kane felt something that might have been hope. The moment shattered with the sound of vehicles arriving outside. Multiple engines, radio chatter, tactical teams moving into position. Kane moved to the window and saw what he'd been dreading. Federal vehicles, armed operators, at least a dozen of them, setting up a perimeter, preparing to breach. And standing in the center of it all, directing operations with calm authority, was a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a Senate hearing room. Even at distance, Kane recognized him from news footage. Senator Richard Voss, the architect of Project Longshot, the man who'd ordered the deaths of Dr. Cross and David Reeves and the 8 other children. Come personally to clean up his final loose ends. We have company, Kane said quietly, and it's about to get very bad. Maya helped Sarah to her feet. Both sisters were armed, both were trained, but both were also exhausted and emotionally shattered, and in no condition to fight their way through a dozen tactical operators. There's a back way out, Maya said, through the old firing range, underground tunnel that leads half a mile into the desert. They might not know about it. It's our only chance. They moved quickly through the ruins, Kane and Dylan covering their retreat while the sisters led the way. Behind them, Kane heard bullhorns calling for surrender, promises of fair treatment and due process. Lies wrapped in official language. Everyone in the building knew what surrender meant. Disappeared into black site prisons, accidents during transport, bodies never found. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind what looked like a collapsed section of wall. Maya pulled away debris to reveal a metal door that screamed on its hinges. Beyond was darkness and the smell of stale air. They descended metal stairs that rang with their footsteps down into a passage barely tall enough to walk upright. The tunnel stretched ahead, lit only by their flashlights. Concrete walls weeping moisture. Patches of mold that looked poisonous in the artificial light. They moved as fast as they dared, knowing that behind them, tactical teams were breaching the building, finding it empty, beginning to search for alternate exits. They were halfway through when Sarah stopped, put her hand on Maya's arm. They'll follow. They'll find this tunnel. They'll catch us before we reach the exit. Then we move faster. No, I slow you down. I'm still fighting the conditioning, can barely think straight. You 3 go. I'll buy you time. Absolutely not, Maya said. I just got you back. I'm not losing you again. You never lost me. I was just buried. But I'm here now, and the best thing I can do, the only thing that matters, is making sure Senator Voss doesn't get to bury all of us. Go. Now, I'll hold them here as long as I can. Dylan stepped forward. I'll stay with you. David would want me to. Would want someone from the family to stand with Asset 011 last time. Sarah looked at him with eyes that were almost human again. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, for David, for all of them. Someone needs to make sure the story doesn't end in an unmarked grave. Kane understood what they were offering. A last stand, a holding action to let the evidence and the witnesses escape. He wanted to argue, wanted to find another way. But tactical reality was harsh and unforgiving. Someone had to stay. Someone had to fight. And Sarah and Dylan had just volunteered. Go, Sarah said to Maya. Tell the truth. All of it. Every ugly piece. Make sure the world knows what they did to us. Make sure those 10 children aren't just forgotten numbers in a classified file. That's the mission now. That's what matters. Maya pulled her sister into one final embrace, held her for 5 seconds that felt like forever. then let go and turned to Kane. "We go now, fast, don't look back." They ran, Kane and Maya racing through the tunnel while behind them, Sarah and Dylan took up defensive positions. The sound of their running footsteps echoed back through the concrete passage, getting fainter. Then came the sound Kane had been dreading. Gunfire. Sharp cracks that bounced off tunnel walls and multiplied into thunder. Maya stumbled, almost stopped, but Kane grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. They chose this. Honor the choice. Keep moving. The gunfire intensified, more weapons joining in. The tactical team had found the tunnel, was engaging. Kane heard explosions, grenades, the sound of the tunnel collapsing somewhere behind them, dust billowing through the passage. And through it all, the steady, measured return fire of two people who'd been trained since childhood to shoot under any conditions. Kane and Maya burst out of the tunnel exit into the desert night. Fresh air and starlight and the vast, empty silence of the wilderness. Maya's Jeep was parked 100 yards away. They ran for it, got in. Maya started the engine and drove without lights, using night vision and memory to navigate through terrain that would have killed a normal driver. Behind them, the gunfire continued for another minute. Then silence. The kind of silence that meant the defenders had been overrun or eliminated. The kind of silence that meant 2 more people had been added to Project Longshot's body count. Maya drove for an hour before she pulled over and killed the engine. Then she sat gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, not crying but not quite holding it together either. Kane gave her space, gave her time, let her process loss and guilt in the particular horror of being the one who survived when others didn't. "She was my sister," Maya said finally. "For 17 years she was my sister. Then she was dead. Then she was a stranger. Then for 5 minutes tonight she was my sister again, and now she's dead for real and I don't know what to feel." Feel everything. All of it. That's what makes you human instead of a weapon. That's what they couldn't take from you. Is it enough being human? David's dead. Sarah's dead. 8 others died before them. I'm the only one left from Longshot, and I survived by running and hiding. Where's the humanity in that? The humanity is in what you're going to do next. You're going to testify. Tell the truth. Make sure their deaths meant something. That's not running. That's fighting. It's just a different kind of battlefield. They sat in silence as the night wore on. Eventually, Maya started the engine and they drove toward the nearest town with a police station, with witnesses who could record what happened before anyone could make them disappear. They had the medical records, had Dr. Cross's journals, had Maya's testimony. And they had something else, something neither of them had mentioned yet. Before they'd fled, Dylan Reeves had pressed something into Kane's hand, a phone, one he'd been using to record everything. The confrontation between the sisters, Sarah's breakthrough, her decision to make a stand, everything preserved in digital format and automatically backed up to cloud storage. The story wouldn't be buried. The truth would come out. And Senator Richard Voss, standing in the ruins of his old program, would learn that some crimes were too great to hide forever, that some ghosts refused to stay silent, that some debts came due no matter how powerful you were. 3 days later, Dylan Reeves woke up in a military hospital outside Phoenix. He'd taken 2 rounds during the tunnel firefight, lost a lot of blood, nearly died. But the tactical team had pulled him out alive, partially because he'd been ID'd as an active duty Marine, partially because killing him would have raised questions when his body was found. Sarah Cross hadn't been so lucky. According to the official report, she'd been killed during an exchange of fire. Classified operator. No name released. No body returned to family. She died as Echo and been buried in whatever darkness the government reserved for assets it couldn't acknowledge. But Dylan knew different. Knew that for 5 minutes before the end, she'd been Sarah again. Knew she'd chosen to die human instead of live as a weapon. Knew his brother David would have been proud. He was visited on his 4th day in the hospital by a Marine colonel he'd never met. The man carried a folder and wore the kind of expression that suggested this was a duty he didn't enjoy. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, I'm here to discuss your immediate future. You've been involved in classified activities that put you in violation of numerous regulations. The easy path forward is to accept reassignment to a remote posting and never speak of any of this again. The hard path is to insist on testifying about what you witnessed. The easy path preserves your career. The hard path probably destroys it. Your choice." Dylan thought about David, about Sarah, about 10 children who'd been turned into ghosts by people who'd sworn to protect them. I'll be testifying, sir, for every official inquiry that wants to hear it, for as long as it takes. Some things matter more than careers. The colonel nodded like he'd expected that answer. Then you should know that as of this morning, Senator Richard Voss was arrested on multiple charges: conspiracy, murder, crimes against humanity. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Medical records, journals, video recordings, witness testimony. He's done, along with everyone else involved in Project Longshot. Your testimony will help ensure they stay done. Dylan closed his eyes and felt something loosen in his chest. Justice. Maybe not perfect justice. The dead would stay dead, the trauma would stay trauma, but the guilty would face consequences. The story would be told. The ghost would finally rest. What about Maya Cross? Dylan asked. In protective custody, cooperating fully. She'll testify at every trial, probably spend years in courtrooms and hearings, but she'll be safe and she'll be heard. That's more than any of them got before. 6 months later, Marcus Kane stood in Arlington National Cemetery watching Maya Cross place flowers on a grave marker that bore no name, just dates, 1995 to 2012, and beneath them a phrase carved in simple letters. Asset 01, Sarah Cross, sister, human, free. Maya had fought to get Sarah buried here, had argued with officials and politicians and military brass who insisted Echo couldn't be acknowledged, had threatened to go public with everything if they didn't allow her sister this one dignity. Eventually, they'd relented, given Sarah a grave if not an official identity, a marker if not full honors. It was more than most of Project Longshot's victims had gotten, more than David Reeves or the 8 others who died in that explosion. But it was something, a place to remember, a space to grieve. Maya stood at the grave for long minutes, not speaking, just existing in proximity to the sister she'd lost twice. Finally, she turned to Kane. They offered me immunity, full pardon for anything I did while part of Longshot. Said I was a victim and victims don't get prosecuted. Said I could disappear again if I wanted. Start over with a new identity in a new place. Forget all of this ever happened. What did you tell them? I told them I was done being a ghost, done hiding, done pretending the past didn't matter. I told them I'd testify as many times as they needed, stand in as many courtrooms as it took, face every camera and reporter and politician who wanted to use my story for their own purposes. Because the alternative was letting my father and Sarah and all the others fade into classified silence. And I couldn't do that, wouldn't do that. Kane nodded. He'd made similar choices, had accepted early retirement from the Marines rather than staying silent about what he'd discovered, had become a vocal advocate for investigating Black programs and protecting whistleblowers, had turned his back on a career he'd loved because some things mattered more than security clearances and pension benefits. You know they'll use you, Kane said gently. Politicians, media, everyone with an agenda. You'll become a symbol whether you want to or not. The face of military abuse, the cautionary tale, the tragic victim. They'll take your story and twist it to fit whatever narrative serves their purposes. I know, but at least it'll be my story, my truth, not buried in a file somewhere, not erased like we never existed. Sarah is in the ground with her real name on a marker. David Reeves has family who knows what really happened to him. My father's journals are in the National Archives where historians can study them. That's not nothing, that's not perfect, but it's more than ghosts usually get. They walked together through the cemetery, past rows of white markers, each one representing a life given in service. Some of those lives had been freely given. Some had been taken. Some existed in the gray space between choice and coercion where most military service lived. What will you do now? Kane asked. After the trials end and the media moves on and people forget? I'll never forget. That's not possible for someone like me. But maybe I'll learn to live with remembering. Maybe I'll find some way to be human that doesn't require forgetting I was a weapon. Maybe I'll teach, show people how to shoot, but also teach them when not to. Teach them the difference between skill and wisdom. Teach them that being perfect at something doesn't mean that something is worth perfecting. She paused at the cemetery gate, looking back at the field of markers. Sarah used to say that caring was the only sin that mattered, that we'd been given a gift and caring would ruin it. She was wrong. Caring was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that kept us human. I cared about her even when she'd forgotten how to care about herself. And at the end, she cared enough to die so I could live. That's not a sin, that's grace. Maybe the only grace people like us ever get to experience. Cain had no answer to that. No wisdom that could make sense of children turned into weapons or sisters forced to choose between killing and dying. All he had was witness. The simple act of standing beside her and acknowledging that what happened had been real and terrible and shouldn't be forgotten. They left the cemetery together. Maya climbed into her truck. The same beat-up Ford she'd driven to Fort Irwin months ago. The Winchester was gone, though, locked in evidence storage somewhere. She'd told investigators she didn't want it back. Too much history, too much blood. Let it rust in a warehouse. Let it become just another forgotten artifact of a program that should never have existed. But Cain knew she'd get another rifle eventually. You didn't spend your formative years learning to shoot and then forget how. The skill was permanent, carved into muscle memory and neural pathways too deep to erase. The question wasn't whether she'd shoot again. The question was whether she'd choose her targets or let others choose them for her. Whether she'd be weapon or guardian or something in between that didn't have a name yet. He watched her drive away toward whatever future awaited. Then he returned to his own car and the long drive back to Virginia. He had his own testimony to prepare, his own accounting to give for the role he'd played in uncovering Project Longshot, his own reckoning with the fact that good men sometimes served bad systems and good intentions sometimes paved roads to hell. But he also had something he hadn't had before: purpose, direction, a sense that his life meant something beyond just following orders and collecting paychecks. He'd helped expose a crime, helped save a life, helped give voices to victims who'd been silenced. It wasn't redemption. You didn't get redemption for doing what you should have done all along. But it was something, a start, a down payment on a debt that would take a lifetime to repay. The trials took 2 years. Senator Voss was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to life in federal prison. 3 other officials were convicted. 2 committed suicide before trial. Dozens more lost their jobs or resigned under pressure. The CIA acknowledged Project Longshot's existence and issued a formal apology. Congress held hearings. Regulations were changed. Oversight was increased. It was the kind of scandal that dominated news cycles for months and then faded into history books. Another example of government overreach. Another cautionary tale. Another reminder that power without accountability breeds monsters. But for the survivors, for Maya and Dylan and Cain and the families of the 10 children, it was more than a scandal. It was vindication, proof that their suffering had been real, that their dead had mattered, that crimes committed in darkness could still be brought to light. And in a cemetery in Arlington, flowers appeared regularly on a marker that bore no name, sometimes left by Maya, sometimes by Dylan, sometimes by people who'd read the stories and felt compelled to honor a girl they'd never known. A girl who'd been turned into a weapon and had chosen at the very end to die as a human being. The ghost line had been crossed so many times in so many ways. Children turned into ghosts by adults who should have protected them. Ghosts who haunted the living with questions that had no good answers. Ghosts who refused to stay silent even after death. But some ghosts, Maya learned, could be laid to rest. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but given peace, given acknowledgement, given the simple dignity of being remembered as people instead of assets, as sisters instead of numbers, as children instead of weapons. She stood one last time at Sarah's grave as winter gave way to spring. The grass was growing green now, new life emerging from old ground. Maya placed fresh flowers and spoke quietly, knowing no one could hear but needing to say the words anyway. I kept my promise. I told them everything, made them hear, made them care. You died protecting me, and I've spent every day since protecting your memory. That's done now. The story's told, the guilty punished, the dead honored. So rest now, big sister. Rest knowing that you mattered, that your life meant something beyond what they tried to make it mean, that you were Sarah Cross, human being, sister, hero, and that you're free now, finally free. The wind moved through the cemetery carrying the scent of cherry blossoms and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a bugler played taps for another funeral, another life honored, another story ended. But not forgotten, never forgotten, because that's what survivors do. They remember, they witness, they carry the stories of the dead forward into the light where even ghosts can cast shadows, and even weapons can learn to be human again. Maya Cross walked away from the cemetery for the last time. She had a class to teach, students to train, a life to build from the wreckage of the one that had been stolen. It wouldn't be easy, would never be easy, but it would be hers, chosen instead of assigned, human instead of programmed, free instead of bound. And if sometimes in the night she heard her sister's voice singing old lullabies from a childhood neither of them had really been allowed to have, well, that was okay. Some ghosts earn the right to haunt. Some memories deserve to be kept alive. Some stories needed to be told and retold until everyone understood the price of turning children into weapons and calling it service. The ghost line had been crossed, but on the other side of that line, in the space between weapon and human, between ghost and living person, Maya Cross had found something the programmers never anticipated. She'd found herself, and that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. I spent 3 months researching Project Longshot to bring you Maya and Sarah's story. The hardest part? Knowing that programs like this existed in the shadows of our own military. What struck me most was Maya's line, "They made me love the theft." That's the real crime, not just stealing childhood, but making victims proud of what was stolen. Question for you veterans and fathers out there. If you discovered your daughter was Asset 07, would you have done what Dr. Cross did? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story moved you, there's more truth waiting in the next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it.